emulators were used in the production of this podcast.
Podcast. That good?
That's awesome, sweetie. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast. This is the show where we take an honest, detailed look at Atari's last home video game console and its library, one game at a time. Whatever led you here to this podcast and episode, I'm glad you made it. Welcome. I am Shinto, your humble corporate overlord, and in this episode, we're blowing the competition away in part number 8002, Syndicate. Syndicate is a 2MB cartridge, a real-time strategy game for one player developed by Bullfrog Productions and published by Ocean Software in March of 1995. It carries an ESRB rating of K to A, kids to adults. Both Bullfrog Productions and Ocean Software I covered in episode 29, Theme Park, so check out that episode if you haven't yet for those company histories. I'm not being lazy, I'm just being efficient, yeah. Syndicate started out after a game called Powermonger was completed. The concept for the game, discussed over beers, largely came from programmer Sean Cooper. Mr. Cooper had joined Bullfrog about 3 years prior, at around 18 years of age, and had been fascinated with computers since the age of 11. He had taught himself BASIC and 6502 assembly, and had started on ARM assembly language on his Acorn Archimedes computer. He was enrolled in the YTS, the Youth Training Scheme, which was a program the UK government had instituted in 1983 as a way to provide practical job skills to kids aged 16 and 17 who had left school without going on to university. They'd get an allowance of £35, is that per week, and often got some on-the-job training. Youth Training Scheme. I don't know, the word scheme here lends a dubious air to the whole thing. Scheme has a negative connotation, at least here in modern-day America. It's not, like, synonymous with plan so much as nefarious plan. Maybe that was the case in the UK as well, because come 1990, it was renamed to simply Youth Training. They dropped the scheme. Anyway, Mr. Cooper was plucked out of YTS by Bullfrog Productions, where he was offered a position as tester. He's credited for quality assurance on Populous, and gradually took on more responsibilities in the company, including pixel graphics in the program Deluxe Paint, and worked on the Populous add-on called The Promised Lands. He served as the lead designer on Flood, which was a side-scrolling platformer that originally started out life as a 4-player game for independently scrolling windows on the same screen, but it didn't work out very well, so the game shifted to single-player. It saw limited release, and according to the Digital Antiquarian, was shockingly ambitious. But back to the pub, post-Powermonger. There was no grand design goal behind their next game. It basically started out with the premise that you wander around and cause carnage and mayhem. Mr. Cooper helped evolve this into a cyberpunk game where governments were replaced by powerful corporations who built cyborg soldiers. He was inspired by comic books and movies like The Terminator, wanting to make a game where you could modify humanoids, upgrade them, making them faster and stronger and probably better dancers too, but I don't think the game gives them much of an opportunity to show off their dance moves. Bullfrog programmer Glenn Corpus, before Powermonger, had worked on an engine that would be able to display a big scrolling playfield, which was light on computer resources. He had done this on an Atari ST, and it was light on the resources because it had only updated the chunks of the screen which had changed, rather than redrawing the whole thing, which is kind of what they did in Populous. Parts of this engine were dusted off in concept if nothing else for use in Syndicate. The game could have gone with a top-down view, but Glenn's input led them to go with an isometric perspective instead, though Mr. Corpus didn't really do much work on Syndicate himself. The game was initially known as Bob, because why not? It's a fine name. Actually, I read that there was a reason behind this name, that it was inspired by Ian Robert Maxwell, a British MP and later controversial owner of a media empire which had spanned the Atlantic. He was known for suing anyone who spoke against him and apparently fell overboard out of his yacht in 1991, so his death was totally in the news at the time the project started, and the whole empire-building thing fits in with the game's theme. Bob started out as a multiplayer-only affair, kind of like the development of Populous and Theme Park using a network of 4 PCs. I've read 8 in one source, but the majority of the sources I consulted said 4, so I'm going to stick with that. The game evolved somewhat organically from the early multiplayer origins. People would run around the endgame city and kill each other, suggest changes and features, and shoot down things that didn't work. So development was pretty close to real time. Mr. Cooper would hear the feedback, go back to his desk, and code up the changes. They played over late nights and weekends, brought in friends to play, lots of deathmatchy goodness. Bob was renamed to Cyber Assault, and the game world became more like a vibrant, functioning city with citizens walking around. Not aimlessly, but into and out of buildings. It was a bit of an illusion, but it worked. Gradually, the single-player elements took over, and multiplayer was stripped from the final release. The feature failed the QA quality assurance step because the different computers would fall out of sync, and there wasn't time to fix it before release. The violence, the extreme levels of violence, this was toned down from earlier builds because playtesters objected to killing babies and puppies. Still, the somewhat toned-down violence ruffled some feathers in Germany, so the red blood was changed to green for that region. The name of the game changed again, too, at the suggestion of their publisher, Electronic Arts, and so Cyber Assault became Syndicate. The game was initially released on the Amiga and PC in 1993, after about 2 years of development, and later saw ports to other platforms, including the Mega Drive and Super Nintendo, the CD32 and 3DO, and computers like the FM Towns, Acorn Archimedes, PC-98, and Macintosh. The Atari Jaguar got a port, too, which kind of explains this episode. The 16-bit ports were toned down. They had different graphics and level design and interface. I'll get into more of that later, but the computer and 32 and 64-bit console ports were much closer to the original. Reviews of Syndicate on release from publications like CU Amiga, Amiga Power, Amiga Games, Amiga Computing, Amiga Format, and some that didn't even have Amiga in the name, like Playtime. These gave the game a 90% plus rating, or equivalent, so it was pretty well received by the press. Syndicate was one of 2 games ported to the Jaguar by Ocean developers Mike Diskett and Alan Wright, the other game of course being Theme Park, which I covered in episode 29. I'm going to basically reiterate what I said there since both games are ported more or less simultaneously, so you might have heard all this already. However, I'll try to tell the story slightly differently. Same notes, different presentation so that it feels fresher. I don't know. Both games together took about 3 months to convert, which involved first getting a feel for the hardware, and then converting the shared libraries that powered many of Bullfrog's titles. Decompression routines were reverse-engineered from the Amiga version and built to run on the Jaguar's TOM chip rather than the slower 68000 processor. It's likely that Atari approached Bullfrog about these ports rather than the other way around, but other than some possible financial incentive up front, Atari didn't provide much to Ocean in the way of tools or support, so Mike and Alan had to write a lot of the tooling and support from the ground up, which makes it all the more impressive that they were able to complete both games so quickly. Word of Syndicate and Theme Park first reached the recycled photons of Atari Explorer Online in April of 1994, but it wasn't until June that we saw the first estimated shipping window of third quarter 1994. That held until October, when the date shifted to the fourth quarter, but word was that the game was now in production. In a Genie Roundtable discussion with Atari on November 30th of 1994, Jaguar and hockey fan Tony Wetmore asked whether or not Syndicate would be networkable To which Atari's Dan McNamee replied, no, it was just a single-player game. In a press release dated February 7th, 1995, Atari announced 6 new third-party games arriving on the Jaguar within the next 45 days. The first major wave of third-party software, it says. Among these titles were Syndicate and Theme Park. The others, in case you're wondering, were Cannon Fodder, Troy Aikman Football, International Sensible Soccer, and Double Dragon 5. Atari president and CEO Sam Trammell was quoted as saying, "These new titles give the consumer a wider range of selection on the Atari Jaguar multimedia platform. The Jaguar now has an excellent introduction of sports, strategy, and general interest software provided by some of the most respected publishers in the industry, with much more to come throughout 1995. For Syndicate, they included a quote from Game Players magazine, which says Syndicate on the Jaguar is ultra cool, better than the Genesis. That quote actually contains 3 ellipses, which means there may be additional context which they chose not to include. It made me wonder what the full quote was, so I looked that up and found it in issue 69 for March of 1985, where they had their Winter Consumer Electronics Show coverage. Here's a full quote. Originally an ultra-cool PC game, Syndicate's Genesis version was adequate, but nothing near the original. The Jaguar version looks to be better than the Genesis and not quite as good as the PC. Either way, Jaguar strategy fans should be stoked about the arrival of the first strategy-type game for the system." So, the quote is technically accurate, but kinda out of context. Thomas Fillion of Seattle, Washington wrote into Electronic Gaming Monthly magazine talking about how much he likes the Atari Jaguar. This letter was published in the April 1995 issue, right underneath another letter from a very disappointed Jaguar owner. But in the middle of Mr. Fillion's letter is a screenshot from Syndicate with the caption, "With games like Syndicate, we may yet hear the Jaguar roar." Does that mean EGM actually liked the game? We'll find out later on in the episode, but for now, let's see what the game is all about. The year is 2096. Humanity has spread to other worlds, eradicated poverty and most forms of disease, struck a generous balance with nature, and made chocolate chip cookies super healthy. Yeah, none of that's true. Instead, nation-states have been supplanted by megacorporations. 3 megacorps in particular, one covering Europe, one Asia, East Asia mostly, and one America. This European corporation, cleverly named Eurocorp, has developed in its biotech division an implant known as CHIP, or chip. Placed in the back of the neck, this device stimulates the brain and produces a variety of effects. It increases perception while simultaneously dulling misery. It's like a drug, the ultimate drug, which may or may not have been commissioned by Huey Lewis. It wasn't a hard sell to get people to buy these things and get them implanted. The marketing slogan was, "Why change the world when you can change your mind?" Sure, the world is bleak and depressing. It's like 2020 every year, but without the funny memes on the internet. Who wouldn't want to get one of these things? These megacorps who are climbing all over each other trying to corner the market. But this chip thing, it does have a side effect, and pretty big one at that. It makes users open to suggestion, like seriously open. Through chip, Eurocorp could actually take control of and manipulate the populace, get them to do things they maybe wouldn't ordinarily do. Now, this kind of control is both fearsome and powerful, and rival companies needed a piece of the action. It got pretty heated. Organized crime weaseled its way in through bribery and assassination, and soon rival crime syndicates battled over control of this technology, the people under its influence, and, of course, territory. You are a young executive, a marketing director in a small syndicate in Europe, and you're charged with, let's say, world domination. It's not that big of an ask, right? Yeah, if you could come in on Saturday and Sunday too and take over the world for us, that would be great. Now, exactly what the acronym CHIP stands for, I couldn't find in any documentation, so I put together some suggestions. It could be a recursive acronym, Chip hates individual prerogative, or maybe Chip has influenced the populace. Maybe it stands for something more benign like cool, happy, implanted part, or could help internal pain. It could be that the inventor was a fan of Shakespeare and named the thing Catch Hamlet's iambic pentameter. Or maybe it's a more sinister acronym like Control Hapless Ignorant People. Or maybe it's directed at me, Can't Help Inactive Podcasters. Well, fine, Chip, I didn't want you anyway. In Syndicate, you control squads of up to 4 chip-enhanced cybernetic agents at a time through various cities as you complete mission objectives designed to wrest control away from rival syndicates. You can equip your agents with weapons and biotech upgrades, and you can take over rival agents and indeed the general population to help you in your world domination plans. You pay for this gear and tech by taxing the populace in the regions you control, and you have to balance these tax rates with the possibility of popular uprisings. You can personalize your syndicate, give it a snazzy logo from one of 40 designs, a color from one of 8 different options, and a name of up to 17 characters, A through Z, 0 through 9, and one of 3 different spacebars. You can also tell the game what your name is, again with up to 17 characters. At your disposal, eventually, is a variety of weapons and other items with which to equip your agents. For regular firearms, you have the pistol. This is a large caliber, semi-automatic handgun. It's not much compared to the other weapons, but it's always nice to have one available. Plus, they're cheap. They basically cost you nothing. They're company issued, I guess, right there in the supply closet between the ballpoint pens and post-it notes. Its range, on a scale of 1 to 10, would be about a 5. In the game, each item you can equip has a range, from 256 through 6,144. Some, but obviously not all of them, are powers of 2. So what I did was convert these from the game's scale to a scale of 1 to 10 to make it easier to compare. And those numbers I'll be presenting here, not like 4,096 or 2,304. But one more number for the pistol is how many rounds it can carry, and that's 12-round magazine. The other weapons and things you've got to pay for. First among these is the pump-action shotgun. This is a powerful but short-range weapon. On the same 10 scale, it would be a 4 in terms of range. Shotguns will carry the same number of rounds as the pistol, 12 shells, but these weapons aren't handed out like candy like the pistols are. The shotguns will run you $250. There's not really a common currency specified in the game, but it feels weird not to use one, so I'm going to say quatlus throughout a classic Star Trek reference, Gamesters of Triskelion, if I'm not mistaken.
Provider 1 bids 300 quatlus for the newcomers.
I think a strategy guide or two has used the currency credits for the game, but I don't know if that's canonical. It's not in the game proper or in the Jaguar or PC manuals, so if I'm going to use something wrong, I'm going to go all out, so yeah, quatlus. The Persuadertron is next in manual order, but although it falls under firearms in the manual, it totally isn't. It doesn't carry ammo, and you don't have to shoot it. You just have to be next to an impressionable person, and you can persuade them in a flash of blue. They'll start to follow the persuasive agent around like a lost little puppy. The manual says zombie, but I like puppies better. Most zombies I know only follow you around so they can, gnaw on you. But back to the actual firearms. If you need to pack a little more heat, try the Uzi 9mm submachine gun. Its range is about a 6 out of 10, and it costs 750 quatlus. Finally, there's the long-range rifle, a sniper rifle. This one maxes out my range scale at 10, and though it's not fast, it's highly accurate and good for assassination or cover fire from a distance. It'll cost you a cool 1,000 quatlus.
1,000 quatlus!
There are also a number of support weapons. The manual breaks these out, I'm not sure why, but they include the flamethrower. It does what it says on the tin. Range is a 2 on my scale, and the cost is only 1,500 quatlus. It's effective against vehicles, crowds, and xenomorphs. Sorry, wrong game. Next we have the minigun, a motorized multi-barrel machine gun capable of a very high rate of fire. Range is good, I put it at a 7 out of 10, and it holds 500 rounds. It's very heavy though, and kind of steep at a cost of 10,000 quatlus. The laser gun is a laser gun. It ranks 7 out of 10 for range, and is good at cutting through pretty much anything, including your bank account, since it'll run you 35,000 quatlus. Finally, in the support weapons category, we have the Gauss gun. This is basically a rocket launcher. It has a long range, 9 out of 10, and it's the most expensive item in the game, at 50,000 quatlus each. Not only is it expensive, it's dramatic, firing what looks like a giant stream of bubbles. Could be puffs of smoke or something, I guess. We have a few special items, special equipment, the manual says, and the first one on that list is a pass card. It's an ID card, identifying your agent as a police officer rather than a bad guy, and it gives you access to some security doors. It costs 1,000 quatlus, and the range is, well, you gotta be pretty close to the door to use it, so we'll say 1 out of 10. The scanner looks for possible threats in the area, as well as equipment and vehicles. Its range is pretty good, 8 out of 10, like the laser, and its cost is 500 quatlus, not like the laser. The time bomb is a thing that blows up after a period of time. It's good for devastating people and vehicles, though not buildings. Its effective range is about 4 out of 10, and its price tag of 25,000 makes it one of the more expensive items in the game. The medkit, or rather medikit, can patch up a damaged agent, but it's a use once and discard sort of thing. They're pretty cheap though, at 500 each, one of the least expensive items in the game. Finally, the shield. It's a force field, but just like the high-end force fields you'll find in real life, these don't last long. They suck down a lot of power to generate, but during that time it'll protect the agent from projectile weapons. You also look cool, like a ring of fire that raises from feet to head. You can't shoot while you have your shields on, but the shields do recharge while idle, so you don't have to go wandering around the city looking for a place to plug it in. 8,000 quatlus. Now, your agents start out as meatbags like you or me. Well, me for sure, I guess I don't really know about you, but in the game, you can and will augment your agents with various cybernetic enhancements. Each of these enhancements is available in 3 levels above standard puny human. First, you can upgrade your agent's brains. Increasing brain power makes the Persuadertron more effective. Eye upgrades increase the range of the Persuadertron and also improve perception. Heart upgrades will improve adrenaline recovery. Chest upgrades, no, not that kind of chest upgrade. These will improve your agent's ability to regenerate health, and also, in a related function, allow your agents to self-destruct. Yeah, you can either regain health or expend it in a rapid fashion. Levels 2 and 3 are required for the Explodey feature, and affects a radius around the ill-fated agent, causing damage, killing things. Less disturbing are leg upgrades, which improve the speed at which your agents move, and arm upgrades, which let them carry heavier weapons without slowing down. As I said, there are 3 different upgrade levels, V1, V2, and V3. You start with V1 available, though none of your agents start out with these upgrades built in. You gotta pay for them. There are other ways you can augment your agents, and that's by injecting drugs into them. There are 3 performance-enhancing drugs available to you, one that enhances intelligence, one that tweaks perception, and one that triggers a flood of adrenaline. The manual refers to this drug cocktail as IPA levels, intelligence, perception, adrenaline, not India Pale Ale, which is what I kept thinking whenever I saw that acronym. I don't even like IPAs. Not even a little. Too hoppy. Anyway, intelligence controls an agent's reactions to a given situation. Higher intelligence yields increased self-preservation. Perception improves weapons accuracy and situational awareness, so they're aware of danger before it starts shooting at them. And adrenaline controls reaction speed. The PC manual says speed of reactions, and the Jaguar manual says speed and reactions. I tend to side with the PC manual's conjunction, because if you wanted physical speed, that's what your leg upgrades are for. but I don't know. I didn't test this specifically. When agents aren't specifically controlled by you, that's when these IPA levels really come into play. If you want to leave an agent on lookout, for example, crank up all 3 levels. These drugs will wear off over time, will lose effectiveness, so you don't want to leave them cranked up when there's no danger. They'll develop a resistance, so with repeated injections, they'll need more juice to get the same effect. The longer an agent's IPA levels are low, the better the potency when injected later. Drugs are free, but upgrades cost money, and getting access to new weapons and equipment costs money. Fortunately, you have some money at your disposal right at the start, $30,000. You can research mods or equipment, but not both, not at the same time, at least. You can only throw your research quatloos at one thing at a time. For mods, you can choose to research the legs, arms, chest, heart, eyes, or brain. For equipment, you can focus on automatic, heavy, assault, and miscellaneous. I could not find any documentation on which equipment research yields which items. It's not listed in-game, not in the manuals I checked, Jaguar PC, 3DO, Super Nintendo, and it's not in the strategy guides that I could find, so I had to break this down myself. Work. Here's the list. Researching automatic will yield the Uzi and then the minigun. Researching heavy will turn out the laser gun and the Gauss gun in that order. Sinking money into assault will give you the flamethrower, then the long-range rifle, and then the time bomb. And finally, the miscellaneous research category gives you the pass card and then the shield. Now that I've assembled this information, the next person to go looking for an itemized, ordered list will also come up empty because this is locked away in an audio podcast. Sorry, next person. When you research something in Syndicate, you select the category and select the amount of funding it'll receive. The more funding, the faster you'll get it. The minimum amount of funding will deliver it in 10 days. At the maximum funding level, you get next day delivery, but boy does that cost you. I feel I should point out with the equipment research that once it delivers one item, funding stops. You'll need to select a new category, or in case you haven't yet gotten everything the previous category had to deliver, the same category again. Categories disappear once you've researched all you can. I mentioned days. These aren't real-time days. Of course, you don't have to keep your Jaguar plugged in for weeks on end to get anything good for your agents to carry around, which is nice. The game has its own internal clock, hours, days, and years, using what in-world is called the New Calendar, or NC. On the Jaguar, 1 hour on the Syndicate New Calendar works out to be about 22 seconds. 1 day, therefore, is a little under 9 minutes in real life. Once per hour, research money changes hands, and once per day, you collect tax money from regions your Syndicate controls. When the new calendar is displayed on the screen, it's in the top right corner, 3 numbers separated by colons with NC as the suffix. These numbers represent hours from 00 to 23, days 1 through 365, and year starting at 85. If the game takes place in 2096, which I read, somewhere, that means that the epoch for this new calendar is in the year 2011. Manuals for other versions of Syndicate, as in not the Jaguar version, say that the new calendar was adopted when the information revolution progressed to such a degree that multiple disparate calendar systems around the world no longer made sense. So, yeah, I guess that happened in 2011, which was, as it turns out, the year Google Plus was launched. Coincidence? I think not. When you start the game, you have 8 agents, from which pool you can deploy, as I said, up to 4 at a time on a mission. As you persuade enemy agents to join your cause, your headcount increases, and as your agents are killed, well, you know. Each agent can be upgraded independently and equipped independently. For equipment, they have 8 slots available, and you can have more than one of a certain thing. Want to go in with 8 pistols? You can do that. As you run out of ammo, well, you still hang on to it. You don't just drop it and pull out another weapon like they do in the action movies. You could tell your agent to set it down, but you might not want to do that because you can reload it after the mission's done for way cheaper than buying a new one. You have to pay for the equipment you give your agents, but you can also sell them back for what you paid, which is nice. Each agent has a name, and like cannon fodder, these seem to be randomly assigned from a pool of names, 67 by my count in Syndicate, though the first 4 always seem to be Edgar, Ripley, James, and Carr. Again, I guess also a little bit like cannon fodder. On the PC version, it seems to be Bush, Hicks, Dawson, and Jones is the default 4. I could be wrong. Anyway, looking at the complete list of names in the Jaguar port, I see a few definite references to real-world people. Cooper, Webley, Trowers, Shaw, Molyneux, Hill, Edgar, and Corpus are all members of the Bullfrog team. Wright and Diskett were the ones who ported the game to the Jaguar, I guess also part of the Bullfrog team. There are US presidents, Nixon, Clinton, and Bush, and 2 more, Ripley and Hicks, are probably references to these characters in the movie Aliens. This connection is made, I think, more likely by a mission name later in the game, Every Formation a Parade, which is something that Sergeant Apone said near the beginning of the movie, extolling the benefits of the Colonial Marine Corps. I'm pretty sure I quoted that whole spiel in the Alien vs. Predator episode of this podcast. Sounds like something I would do. Missions fall into one of 11 categories: assassination, assault, combat patrol, combat sweep, escort, equipment acquisition, equipment recovery, personnel acquisition, raid and rescue, reconnaissance, and sabotage. 28% of the total missions in the game would be assassination, 24% are personnel acquisition, 18% are combat sweep, and the rest of them, the other 8, make up the remainder, with 6% each, or less. Each mission also has a name, like a code name, and some of these are pretty interesting. My favorites include Scum Patrol, Spring Cleaning, Walk on the Wild Side, I Shot the Sheriff, and as I mentioned previously, Every Formation a Parade. Also, there's The Lady is a Tramp, and Old MacDonald. Some of the names are pretty bland, though, like Convoy, Capture, Database, Purge, and Snatch and Grab. Before you take on a mission, you can read a briefing all about what's going on and what you need to do. If that's not enough information for you, you can shell out some cash to learn more, typically buying a defense update, target update, and suggested tactics. But these can vary from mission to mission. You also get a map before tackling a mission, but the map is pretty vague. You can improve the quality of this map by paying to enhance it, and like the info, you have a small number of enhancement levels. It's like you start at the Atari 2600 in terms of map resolution. Then you can pay to move on to the 5200, then the 7800, and then the links, each one costing more and more money. If you opt to select the mission from there, you can go on to choose, equip, and cyborg up your team. If you don't accept the mission, you can go back to the map and maybe choose another. The map shows a color-coded list of all the different territories around the planet, and selecting one will show you the territory name, the population, without commas or anything breaking up the long list of numbers, unfortunately, the current tax rate, which will be unknown if your syndicate doesn't control it, and the status of a controlled territory. The different possible statuses are from best to worst, very happy, happy, content, unhappy, discontent, and rebellious. If a territory turns rebellious, you'll have to go back in and basically do the same mission over again to win it back. Mood seems to be based on tax rate, so the higher the taxes, the angrier the territory becomes. And if they've turned rebellious on you, it's too late to try to appease them by lowering their taxes. That ship has sailed. In the mission, you can see little pictures of each agent on the ground and what they're doing. You can see their health and their IPA levels, their weapons and equipment, with ammo for each if applicable. You can select one of them or all of them for movement, and you can cycle weapons or adjust IPA levels in bulk as well. There's a little text box with a short reminder of what you're there to do, be it evacuate, persuade, protect, assassinate, or eliminate agents. You also get a map with a handy radar signal showing the location of your target. You control a cursor that moves around the playfield and can either move agents to the location you select or do some other context-aware thing. Unlike in cannon fodder, your little people aren't just going to move in straight lines to wherever you select with your pointer, but will move around objects and do what they can to arrive where you tell them to. It is possible to tell them to go to an impossible location, someplace they can't reach, and you'll see them try moving around in circles until you tell them otherwise. So they're smarter than the guys in Cannon Fodder, but maybe not by much. Win or lose following a mission, you see a debriefing screen with a mission status, agents used, agents gained, time in a mission, hours and days, number of kills broken out by enemy agents, criminals, civilians, police, and guards, and you also get a count of people persuaded and your hit accuracy percentage. If you picked up any new weapons during your mission, anything to which you lack access originally going in, there's a message on the debriefing screen that says, "New weaponry has been submitted to the research department." What this means, basically, is that if you pick up something new and shiny, while you can probably use it in that mission, you can't take it with you into the next mission. You can, however, research that item specifically. You'll already have a head start on it. And once research is complete, you'll be able to equip all of your agents with it. I guess the eggheads down in the lab have got to reverse engineer the thing and figure out how to make more. If a mission is successful, mission completed, that territory gets the same color you selected when you configured your company, and you can adjust the tax rate. If the mission failed, you don't get any of that stuff and you've got to retry the mission, minus the agents you lost, if any, and the money you spent on it. You can also withdraw from an active mission. You can nope right out of there with whatever you've got left. There are a couple ways that this game could end for you. If you lose all of your agents, well, you're out of a job and the game is over. You hear the title screen music, you get a static image of your airship crashing down to Earth. Game lost is written out on the screen in green text, followed by all agents terminated. Why is your airship in flames and only now starting to obey gravity? The Jaguar manual doesn't say, but other manuals do. Here's an excerpt from the PC manual. If you're so inept that all 8 cyborgs supplied by the Syndicate are killed, the game is over. As an embarrassment and a liability to your Syndicate, an explosive device hidden on board the command airship is detonated by the Syndicate executive, and you crash in flames into the city. It's a quick death, and for that you should be thankful, but you ain't exactly going down in a blaze of glory. Don't say we didn't warn you. Back to what we see in the Jaguar port. After a few seconds, we get the menu screen background with the word Syndicate at the top, and the text Game Over written out in the middle, which is followed by the credits typed out in turn. Original game design, conversion by, Jaguar programming, PC programming, producer, graphics, level design, sound and music, management, testing, for Ocean producer, and quality assurance and documentation. Finally, we see the text, "Thank you for playing Syndicate," and this is replaced very briefly by "Keep on thinking," before dumping you back to the title screen. When you control every territory on the planet, you make your Syndicate proud and win the game. Maybe there's a bonus in it for you, or a subscription to the Jelly of the Month Club. I don't know, one can only hope. But what happens in the game when you win should be considered a spoiler, so I'm going to say Bishop. Activate spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. If you wish to avoid spoilers, skip ahead 24 seconds on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark.
You hear the title screen music and get a new screen showing your floating airship. This isn't like the airship image you see when completing any other mission. Green text will be written across this static image saying Game Won, W-O-N, and then all states conquered. The rest is just like the Game Over screen when you lose, with the credits and the Keep on Thinking. That's it. Pretty exciting, huh?
End of spoilers. The remainder of this episode is just as boring.
Wait, that's not... Well, maybe. Because coming up next I talk about the controls. For far too long. You control Syndicate with all your Jaguar gamepad has to offer, and then some. But before I get into that, let's take a look at how the original computer games were controlled, specifically the Amiga and PC, and probably Macintosh. These were all mouse-driven. You could use the keyboard to navigate the main menu if you really wanted, or to type in the company name and so forth, and the spacebar on occasion, but everything else is controlled with the mouse. Point on things, left click, right click. In gameplay, Move to the edge of the screen to scroll the playfield. It's all quick and easy and mostly intuitive. The Jaguar version doesn't have mouse support. You navigate menus with the directional pad, except in some menu interfaces you have to cycle between panels using the B button. The A button selects things in menus most of the time. The Jaguar development standards say that B should be the primary button with A secondary, but that's not how it works in Syndicate, especially in the menus, and that threw me off until I got used to it. The C button has a function when entering a company name and your name. It's a quick backspace key, but other than that, it behaves a lot like a shift key, often reversing the action when you hold it down and push some other button, but more on that later. The pause button functions as expected, and you can pause anywhere, even in the menus. In other episodes, I've sort of complained about how unnecessary that can be, but here in Syndicate, during many of the menus, the new calendar clock is ticking, so being able to pause there makes sense. While paused, if you hold down the A button, you can adjust the music volume with the help of a little pop-up box that contains a slider, left or right, to adjust the level. Holding the B button lets you do the same for sound effects. Holding C and pushing left or right on the directional pad lets you adjust the panel position, the thing on the left side of the screen when you're in a mission. Holding Option and pushing left or right while paused lets you adjust the screen position horizontally, the whole screen. Both of these can be helpful when playing the game on a CRT, giving you options to fit everything on the screen. In my experience, repositioning the entire screen was helpful to get it all centered on my CRT, but moving the panel wasn't necessary for me. On an LCD, positioning isn't much of an issue. Also, I should note that you can reposition the screen from the main menu without using pause, just pushing Option and then left or right on the D-pad. One last thing you can do while paused is push 1 and 3 on the keypad at the same time to toggle the paused graphic off and on. In all the menu screens, pressing the 0 button will toggle the music on and off, but not in-game. It does something else there. In-game or in-menu, holding star and hash will restart the Jaguar, erasing any progress you've made since you last saved. Buttons 1 through 5 behave the same in the menus and in the game, insofar as they're used to select agents. 1 through 4 to select that numbered agent, and 5 to either select or deselect all of them. Well, you don't unselect all of them, you always have a selection of at least one. The only menu where you'll need to do this is when configuring your team. And speaking of the team configuration, the C button can be used here in conjunction with the numbers 1 through 4 to deselect that agent so they won't be part of the mission. It's a toggle though, so you can add them back in if you want, again, holding C. I think that's about it for the menu stuff, so let's talk about the gameplay controls. The directional pad will move a cursor around the playfield. The cursor can change depending on what it's over. There's a grab icon when you can pick something up, for example. When you do this, when you do a grab, you'll see in text what that thing is, and a slot in your agent's inventory will flash an icon for that thing. If you move the cursor to the edges of the playfield, your view of the playfield will scroll. If you hold the C button and push any direction on the D-pad, the screen will scroll in that direction without moving the cursor. Sounds reasonable. But this cursor of yours, unlike the computer ports of Syndicate, you can't use it to access any of the controls along the left side of the screen, the panel, it's called. Which makes sense because that sort of thing works well with the precision of a mouse, and sounds kind of miserable with the digital directional pad. So instead we get shortcuts to do various things. Again, 1 through 4 on the keypad will select that numbered agent, and 5 will select or deselect all of them. The 6 button will recenter the screen on whichever agent is currently selected, with a bit of green and white static thrown on your screen for effect. But back to the buttons. The B button will move the selected agent or agents to wherever the cursor is pointing, or pick things up if you have a little grabber icon, or climb into a vehicle or whatever. The A button fires in the direction of the cursor, that is if you have a weapon selected. The 7 and 8 buttons will cycle through the selected agent's weapons or other items. 8 cycles left to right, and 7 is right to left. The 9 button toggles agent tracking mode. Normally, your view is uncoupled from the agent positions, but if you had an agent on the move and you wanted the screen to move with him or her, that's what the 9 button is for. You get another burst of static when activating agent tracking, but not when deactivating the tracking. The buttons along the bottom of the keypad control your IPA levels, but more like API because that's the order they're in. Star controls adrenaline, 0 is perception, and hash is intelligence. I don't know why they're in this order on the controller. How these things work is you push the button for the designated performance drug, and it'll increase the injection level. You can hold the C button while pushing star, 0, or hash to turn them back down. There are 10 levels, neutral by default, and you can crank them up or crank them down if you wanted. Let's talk about some other C button combos, because like they say on the Stuff They Don't Want You to Know podcast, here's where it gets crazy. Holding C and B will activate panic mode. Agents will draw weapons and use them however they see fit. This also cranks up their IPA levels to maximum. Holding C and 7 will holster the weapon. Remember, sometimes you don't want to walk around brandishing a gun or whatever, it'll draw undue attention.
Please, put down your weapon.
So you can deselect the weapon by holding C and 7. The other weapon selection button was 8, right? So C and 8 will do one better than C and 7. It'll actually cause your agent to drop the selected weapon or other item. Well, set it down gently. Unlike C and 7, you can only do the C8 thing with one agent at a time, which is probably a good idea because it seems inadvisable for all your agents to throw away their weapons simultaneously. Holding the C and the 1 button will zoom in, and C and the 2 button will zoom out. There are 3 zoom levels available: normal, zoomed in, and zoomed out. This is a feature I'm pretty sure is exclusive to the Jaguar. It's a smooth zoom too, not like a jump cut zoom. When you zoom in, though, things do become quite pixelated. There's no smoothing, just scaling, and everything's pretty tiny when you zoom out, but hey, can't argue with a Jaguar exclusive feature, right? Holding C and the 3 button will, the manual says, go to point on scanner map, but I haven't been able to figure out how that's different from just walking to the cursor by pushing the B button. Maybe it's a way to move over to an item without picking it up, because it does do that. Holding 1 and 3 together will withdraw from the mission. It's also how you end a mission that's already been completed. So if you wanted to wreak some additional mayhem after you're completing your primary objective, you can do that, and then 1 and 3 when you've had your fill. You don't have to remember this sequence. It'll display it on the screen when the mission's accomplished. And finally, holding C, 7, and 9 will self-destruct the currently selected agent if the ill-fated individual is equipped with a V2 or V3 chest upgrade. It's a lot of buttons and a lot of stuff to remember, but despite thoroughly maxing out the Jaguar controller, there was no overlay produced or shipped with the game. Atari Age user M1 Garand created an overlay for this game, and I'll have that linked in the show notes. I also decided to try my hand at creating a custom overlay design for Syndicate, and while it's not as tidy as M1 Garand's, it does include all possible keypad functionality, so that's in the show notes as well. Syndicate on the Jaguar consists of menus to set up a mission and an isometric view of the world when you're actually in a mission. But before we get to those, let's explore what happens when you first boot up the game. After the Jaguar BIOS with a rotating cube, you get the ocean logo on a black background, and before that fades away, the music kicks in. 5 seconds after the ocean logo appears, it's replaced by the title screen. This is a static image with the word Syndicate in white letters along the top, kind of a stencil-looking font with the drop shadow set over a purple-tinged view of what looks like some kind of lobed office building. This is a still image from the opening animation on the computer ports of the game. Computer as well as 3DO and CD32 and a few others. Actually, pretty much all of them, though some of these ports have fewer colors and or smaller images. Here on the Jaguar, you're looking at your own Syndicate headquarters with 2 retractable barriers protecting Westgate 1 in place. Just behind the inner barrier is a transport of some sort on its way out. Previously, in the computer cinematic, we had seen a hover car passing through the gates on its way back to base after nabbing or recruiting a new agent in the European city of New Hessen. I thought maybe that context would be helpful here, because the one still image in the Jaguar game doesn't really convey that. You can, though, see a command airship in the top left corner of the image, which is something. Don't stare too long, though, because after 8 seconds, you're dumped to the main menu. It says so right at the top. This is a very green screen, which might also benefit from some explanation using the PC version as a guide. So you're looking at a desk. There's a lamp off to the right, a notebook and writing utensil below it in the foreground, and some other stuff off to the left. In the middle is a roundish thing, and that's your holographic screen projector. That's why everything's green tinted. Your translucent holographic screen can only do the one color. There's a bright green border around the edges, and the menu is presented in green text with the currently selected item a brighter green than the others. There's no animation or anything here. The menu items are Configure Company, Begin Mission, Load Game, Save Game, and Restart Game. Those last three are pretty self-explanatory, I think, though you'll get a pop-up confirmation dialog when selecting either Load Game or Save Game. If you're too indecisive about which one to pick, after 30 seconds, the Attract mode will begin. It loads in a level, Central Europe, with 4 well-equipped agents. The cursor moves around the screen, zooming out here, zooming in there, sending agents on a killing spree. After about 2 minutes and 16 seconds of gameplay, roughly, we're back on the green screen with some text outlining the story. After that, it's back to the title screen, and then the main menu with the same Central Europe gameplay sequence repeating after that. Pushing any button during the Attract mode will take you to the main menu, except for pause, but once you unpause, it'll take you to the main menu anyway. Since we're here, let's start at the top with Configure Company. The D-pad moves between these, and the A button selects. The other buttons do nothing, except, again, for pause. Now, unlike, I think, every other Jaguar game I've covered, the pause graphic here in Syndicate is animated. It's just a simple animation blinking a brighter green in the menus, or blinking between green and red during gameplay, but hey, animated. So, Configure Company. You'll have the current configuration in the top left corner, a menu of details that you can change in the top right, and in the bottom, 2 buttons for Accept and Menu. Both of these take you back to the main menu, but only one of them actually accepts the proposed changes. Can you guess which one? I'll bet you can. There's some flashing stuff here, and this is actually a key navigation cue. I mentioned previously that the B button will cycle between various menu elements, and flashing borders indicate which of these menu elements is currently active. On Configure Company, they're all active, so you can use the directional pad to move between them and the A button to choose. Again, the text is brighter when selected, and it also flickers a bit. So while it's nice to have these blinking borders between B button presses, sure, at the same time it's kind of a visual overload. Maybe if they use something other than shades of the color green, I don't know. Your default company details include a red Bullfrog logo with an empty company name and empty executive name. That's you, you're the executive. Under Select Detail to Change, the first option is Color and Logo, so let's do that. There's no sound other than the background music when you navigate all these menus, but I think the silence is an improvement over the DOS version, which plays this sound every time you change screens. It gets old fast. You have left and right arrows to change the color, and another set of arrows for the logo. Select OK to keep your selection, or cancel to not. You can't use left or right on the directional pad to choose between OK and cancel, only up and down. It's weird. Other places, left and right will choose between horizontal buttons. Oh well. When you choose company name or your name, you'll get a pop-up dialog with a keypad. This keypad uses a 7x6 grid of buttons that contain the letters A through Z and numbers 1 through 9. There's also a white DEL button, which serves as a backspace. Even though it's white, it's still a pleasant splash of color compared to the greenness of everything else. With 26 letters and 10 numbers plus deletes, that leaves 5 empty buttons on this 7x6 grid. 3 of these function as a spacebar, and 2 do not. How can you tell which ones are which? Trial and error, my friends. Trial and error. Okay, I'll tell you. The 2 in the bottom row, far right, those don't work. These names, company name, your name, these can be, as I said, up to 17 characters long, and any that you try to enter beyond that will do nothing. You move the directional pad up, down, left, or right to move a flashing box around each of these buttons, but it will not wrap around. The text entry field is a black box with a grid, and there's a sweeping animation across the grid to give it a bit of flair. A couple undocumented functions here. You can push the B button to toggle between the text entry and the OK cancel buttons below. You don't have to use B, you can just move the flashing cursor down to the buttons, but B is faster. I just want to point out that here, up and down do not move between OK and cancel, but left and right do. The other undocumented function is that the C button is a quick backspace, functioning like the DEL button on screen. I have trouble entering names on this thing. Sometimes key presses aren't registered, sometimes they're registered more than once, especially C to backspace. You'll often end up deleting more than you want. Once your company has been configured the way you want it and you think you've got a handle on the navigation controls, go back to the main menu and select Begin Mission. These screens, they're all pretty static. In other ports, namely the computer ports, you have an animation drawing the screens out. The animation's nice, I've got to say, so if you're used to those, you'll probably be missing them here. If not, well, at least you don't know what you're missing. Well, now you do. Where was I? Begin mission. This brings you to the map screen, the whole world split up into 50 territories. No Antarctica, though. No Syndicate has claimed Antarctica. It doesn't even appear on the map. So, unlike Theme Park, you don't have to worry about the continent at the bottom of the world and all of its many, many penguins. Here, the B button functions as either a two-way or three-way toggle. If you haven't conquered anything yet, it's a two-way, selecting between the territory and selecting the buttons at the bottom, which are brief and menu. You can't select territories your syndicate does not control unless you hold down the C button while moving your company logo around the map with a directional pad. In the bottom center of the screen, between the two buttons, you've got a box containing the name of the territory, the population, the tax rate, if you control it, unknown otherwise, and oddly, the word own if you haven't conquered it yet. I don't know. If it's yours, though, you can adjust the tax rate by moving the directional pad left or right to change the rate from 0% to 100% in 1% increments, or you can hold down the C button to move in 10% increments. The population is updated every new calendar day, every 24 hours. The territories are color-coded by the controlling syndicate, and you can sometimes see these change at midnight as well. Only for missions you can tackle will you be given the brief button at the bottom. If you already control it and its citizens aren't rebelling, you can't go back in. If you haven't unlocked it yet, you can't go in. Once you successfully choose the brief button, you get the mission brief screen. Your company logo and color is shown in the top left, the calendar remains in the top right, and along the right edge you have your budget, how much money you have, a box that says info with a number, and a box that says enhance with a number and a map. The map doesn't really look much like a map when you first go in. Dominating the screen is a big box with text outlining the mission. Down at the bottom of the screen are three buttons: Accept to accept that mission, Map to go back to the map screen, and Menu to go back to the main menu, like if you wanted to save or load the game. The B button is a five-way toggle in this order. Starting with buttons at the bottom, it moves to Info, then Enhance, then the briefing text. If it has active left or right arrows, you can push left or right on the directional pad to flip between the briefing screens. After this, oddly, pushing B will activate the little map in the corner. You'd think that since the map is right under Enhance, which affects the map, that they'd be adjacent in B button cycles, but they're not. Once the map is active, the directional pad will let you move around it. Here's what it shows. Your insertion point is flashing red and white, enemy agents flash red, streets and transport routes are gray, and buildings are green. You don't know where the target is until you have boots on the ground. For the info box, the number under it is the cost for the next level of information. If you push the A button there, you'll get more text added to your big briefing box. Once you've bought all the information you can, the number in the info box disappears. It's about the same with the enhance box, except every time you enhance, your map becomes more detailed. When you're done with all that, choose Accept. Now you get the team selection screen. In, or rather near, the top left corner you have 4 numbered boxes, 1 through 4. Use the Jaguar keypad to choose which agent will be displayed in the center, or if you hold C and push a number, you'll toggle their activation. Their numbered box becomes dim. When you choose a number, you'll see everything there is to see about that agent. Their name, gender, modifications, and weapons. You'll see a diagram of that agent, lacking clothes and hair, and on their left side, our right, skin. As you cyborg them up, their left side image is updated. In general, V1 has a silver color, V2 is a gold color, and V3 is, we'll call that titanium. The eyes for version 1 are blue, version 2 has green eyes, and version 3 is a Terminator-like red. Their right side, our left, doesn't change appearance as you mod them up, except for chest upgrades. Without any mods, your agent's diagram looks very anatomical. They're quite nude, just lacking genitalia. As you upgrade their chest, they look less and less human. Beneath these 4 numbered boxes are several buttons, reading Research, Team, Mods, Equip, and Accept. Pushing the B button on your controller until the button box is flashing, and by pushing the directional pad up or down, choose... We'll come back to Research in a bit. Let's go with Team first. Selecting Team with the A button will display all the agents you have at your disposal in a list along the right edge of the screen, underneath your bank account balance. The agents currently selected will have their number next to their name, and empty slots will say empty. Pushing the B button, twice by my count, will activate that list, and you can push the A button to reassign the selected agent to the selected number. That agent's diagram is now displayed in the center. Back to the list of buttons on the left, selecting Mods will replace the list on the right with all the cybernetic modifications you have available. Pushing the B button twice to get over to that list will let you replace anything in the current agent. After you select something, you'll see the cost, a short description, and then the option to purchase or cancel. Upgrades cost money, and downgrades cost money. Your agent has to go into surgery, I'll assume either way, so every time you change something up, it'll cost you. Back to the buttons, we'll try Equip. This will bring up a list of all the equipment you have available, weapons and shields and whatever. Below and to the right of the agent diagram, you'll see their inventory. This can hold up to 8 items. If they have a thing, you'll see a little picture of that in a blue box, and if it takes ammo, a little red bar showing how much ammo remains. Selecting anything from that inventory will show you what it is and its range, and offer to let you sell it. I believe for the most part you can sell it for the full purchase price. I didn't check all the items, but for the ones I spot checked, that was true. If you want to change out an item, you have to sell it first, and then from the Equip menu on the right, purchase a replacement. This is also where you go to reload a weapon. Changing out inventories requires a lot of B button presses to cycle between the inventory and the equipment list, often passing through the buttons on the left. Let's circle back to that Research button. This doesn't have a naked agent diagram, this has an XY graph. X is time and Y is completion percentage. In the top left, there is a list of things that you can research. Below that is a placeholder for adjusting the research level. Along the right is a list of the things you've already researched, along with how much money you have left. The buttons in the bottom left corner read Mods, Equip, and Accept. When you're just starting out, your equip options are Automatic, Heavy, Assault, and Misc. And your mods options are the next level of Legs, Arms, Chest, Heart, Eyes, and Brain. You start with V1 of each available, so the research list starts with V2. Selecting anything from a list on the right will show you a cost and brief description. Using the B button on the controller cycles between the buttons, the research categories, the list on the right, and the funding level, if applicable in that order. Select one of the research categories and it'll tell you the minimum and maximum cost for funding that research. Minimum is if you're fine waiting the full 10 days, and maximum is for next day delivery. Assuming you choose research, you get 2 more buttons, funding up and funding down, or funding plus and funding minus, which surround the cost of funding that level. The graph will show you the delivery time for that funding level. It'll start funding immediately, deducting money every hour until funding is complete, or if you drop your funding to 0. The game will remember your funding percentage for each category in case you change your mind partway through. Again, you can only research one thing at a time. Choose Accept to get out of there and back to the team selection screen, and then Accept again to actually start the mission.
Are we there yet?
Almost. First, you have a black screen that says Loading Mission in green text. This can last around 10 seconds, and then you're in the mission. Your screen is dominated by your aerial view of the action, you floating overhead in an evil airship. You'll see your agents with yellow numbers 1 through 4, depending on which numbers you loaded into this mission, with the currently selected agent's number flashing red. If you've selected all agents, they won't flash, just the one that was most recently selected. You'll also be hearing this sound, but more on that in a bit. You have a mouse cursor, an arrow, floating menacingly over your agents, which can move up, down, left, or right to point at various things or move your view around. Along the left edge of the screen is your control panel. In the top left corner, you'll have a little picture of your trench-coated agents. That's part of the dress code, you know. You'll see what they're doing, walking, taking damage, bleeding all over the place, a little smoking pile of debris, that sort of thing, and which direction they're facing. To the right of each of the little agent pictures is their health meter. This is a white vertical bar, and below the picture, their IPA levels. Adrenaline is at the top, that's red. Perception is in the middle, colored blue, and intelligence is kind of a yellowish brown. There's a white line in each of these three boxes, in the middle by default, marking their current tolerance level. The higher it is, the more to the right this little white line appears, the more you have to crank up the drug to get the same effect. The color of each level will be slightly darker to show the amount of the drug that has been used. There are numbers 1 through 4 in each agent's box in the corner, but they're kind of hard to see. Dark green on light green, also your agent is standing in front of it. The order is exactly the same as on the team selection screen, if that helps. Between the top 2 and bottom 2 agents is a little bar with 4 tiny stick figure people enclosed within parentheses. This seems to be a holdover from the computer ports of the game being a button that you would click to toggle selection of all the agents, but here on the Jaguar it's pretty useless because you can push the 5 button on your controller to do the same thing, and each agent's box is highlighted anyway when they're active. Well, I kind of take that back. This little stick figure bar is also on the team selection screen, and there, it's the only visual indicator that everybody in your team has been selected, so I guess it's not entirely vestigial. Below the 4 agent boxes is a little narrow bar which shows your basic mission objective, what your agent is up to, what weapon you can pick up, basically helpful little messages, whatever can fit within 16 characters. Below this, you have the currently selected agent's inventory, laid out just like it was in the team selection screen, with ammo levels, if applicable, in red. The highlighted item is a much brighter green, and you'll notice the appearance of your agents, both in the gameplay view and in their little mini view in the corner, is updated depending on which weapon they have drawn, if any. And finally, in the bottom left corner, that thing making all the pinging sounds is your scanner. Just like before, roads are gray, buildings are green, enemy agents are red, but you can also have police, which are black dots, civilians, and dead agents, as it turns out, which are white dots. Aggro enemies are flashing brown circles, and if something is flashing white and yellow, that means there are people caught in your Persuadertron. There are also blue squares, which represent vehicles. Your objective's location is indicated by white arcs emanating from your agent's position, basically telling you where to go, which is nice. That's what the pinging sound is for. This is actually different from the PC version, where it's the target at the center of the pings, which radiate out in all directions. Also, in the PC version, the pings get faster as you approach the target. That doesn't happen here on the Jaguar, which I find odd. I like the PC version's approach better. This scanner map can also show a red circle which indicates the evacuation zone. If you win a mission, if you complete it successfully, you don't have to bail right away. You can walk around and recruit and or gun down other characters or explore the city. But the little status display will be flashing press 1 and 3. Once you do so, once you press 1 and 3, you'll see a still picture of your airship. I'm assuming that's you up there, floating near some buildings with fireworks going off in the background. The airship has what looks like the word Empire on it, and the words Mission Complete and then State Conquered are typed out on the screen. On the computer versions, this is not a static image, but rather an animation, and we can see that the airship has a large display on the side which spells out, "Welcome to the dawning of a new empire," and you hear a roaring crowd and fireworks overhead. If you lose, you're kicked out of the level after 12 seconds, and you see a guy sitting grumpily in a chair. The words Mission Failed and then State Unconquered are typed out on the screen. On the computer versions, this is another animation where he picks up a lamp and hurls it through the holographic display on the other side of the room. This is you, presumably in your airship, throwing a little temper tantrum. Either way, win or lose, you get a mission debriefing screen where you can see the mission status, completed, failed, or withdrew from mission, along with the number of agents used, new agents gained, time in mission, enemy agents killed, criminals killed, civilians killed, police killed, guards killed, people persuaded, and a hit accuracy percentage. Once you accept that, you're back in the map screen. Before I move on to the next part of the episode outline, which covers graphics and sound, I wanted to talk a bit about the save feature in Syndicate. You can save and load at any point outside of an actual mission, but not everything gets saved. The manual helpfully lays out what is stored to cartridge when you save the game in Syndicate. So what's saved includes the current game day and year, all names, mods, and weapons of the currently selected 4 agents, and the next 4 most well-equipped agents. The names and any mods of the remaining agents are saved, but their weapons are sold and not saved. The saved money is added to your account. All owned cities are saved along with our current happiness value. Current tax levels are stored as the nearest value of 0%, 33%, 66%, and 99%. All fully completed items of research are saved, both mods and weapons. Any item currently being researched is saved along with its funding level. However, any partially completed research on that item is not saved. And finally, the adjusted money amount is saved to the nearest 100 units. Something I wanted to add is that your company color and I'm pretty sure logo are saved, but not your company name or your name. Still, that's a good amount of information, I think, to fit within the 128 bytes of the Jaguar EEPROM. Way better than you get in Theme Park. Graphics for Syndicate on the Jaguar, aside from all the green-tinted menus, involve sprite-based pixel art presenting the world from a 3/4 overhead perspective, which is explained in the manual as your perspective from your hovering command airship. It's a good explanation. Character sprites have multiple angles to them, and though your line of sight may be obscured by buildings and other objects, you still know where they are because of the numbers they have floating over their heads. Each of the characters is about 20 pixels tall, so about 60% bigger than the tiny sprites in cannon fodder. Besides other people walking around, there can be animations going on in the city, advertising displays, floating orb things, police sirens. You can even see a dripping blood animation for dead characters. The color depth is very low for a Jaguar game. We're talking 256 colors, 8-bit, sometimes less. The menu screens, for example, will only give you 140-something colors. You'll therefore notice a lot of color dithering on the screen. Frame rates can be inconsistent. In small locations without a lot going on, it's fairly smooth. In bigger regions with a lot of characters moving around, and especially when you're shooting the Gauss gun around everywhere, it gets pretty dang choppy, both in terms of on-screen action and your ability to control your agents. Low single-digit frames per second. You'll also find that animations, including character movement, will stop when you're moving around the screen, panning the screen around. And if the little text window is currently flashing anything when you're scrolling the screen, it'll flash super fast. Music is likewise below the quality you'll find in other Jaguar games. There are only 3 music tracks that I could find, the title theme and 2 mission themes. There's the usual slow-paced mission tune, and an up-tempo one that plays when you're going head-to-head against enemy agents, or the action is otherwise elevated. These tracks run for between 37 and 107 seconds before repeating. Additionally, there are 2 other, shorter music tracks that play following a completed mission or failed mission, each of these only lasting 6 to 7 seconds long. The music is kinda thin, 3 voices tops, but often only 1 or 2. The speech and weapons sound pretty good though. Speech includes mission complete,
Mission completed.
and mission failed.
Mission failed.
And whatever the heck it is they say when you cycle between agents or give them a task.
Selected.
Silicate? Syndicate? Silly kid?
Selected.
I don't know. Police will say this when you're waving your weapons around.
Please, put down your weapons.
Speaking of which, you've got weapon sounds too. Here's a medley. Explosion sounds. And some screaming when you set somebody on fire.
What was this game rated?
What? Oh, K to A, kids to adults, ages 6 and up.
Immolating characters in a video game is considered child-friendly.
Yes, apparently so.
Humans make no sense.
It keeps us, interesting. Keeps us interesting.
Right.
There are a large number of cheat codes available in Syndicate here on the Jaguar, and these might seem familiar coming from some other ports of Syndicate. However, if you're well versed in computer codes, you might notice one or two of them isn't available on the Jaguar. More on that in a bit. All of the cheat codes are entered as your company name. To get them to work, you need to only enter the name and select OK. You don't need to accept your company configuration or go back to the main menu. It takes effect immediately. There's no confirmation sound or message that the code was accepted, though. First code, rob a bank. That'll give you 100 million quatlus. Watch the clock will speed up the passage of time. So instead of an hour taking 22 seconds, now it takes a mere 0.41 seconds, give or take. So a day therefore lasts only 10 seconds. This means research is completed much faster and tax money flows in faster too. If you enter nuke them, that's spelled N-U-K space T-H-E-M, that unlocks every territory. You can take on the last level right from the start, though you'd get mowed down pretty quickly.
Mission failed.
You can enter to the top to unlock every territory and get 100 million quatlus, kind of combining rob a bank and nuke them into one handy cheat code. Atari Age lists one more cheat, which isn't so much a code as it is an artifact of the save game feature. When you save a game, there's not enough room on the Jaguar cartridge EEPROM to store ammo counts for each weapon. So complete a mission, save the game, load the game, and you'll be at full ammo for all your weapons. There's a downside to this, though, in that partially completed research is not saved. So if you're a day away from unlocking something cool and you do this trick, you'll have to start that research over again. During my own research of Syndicate on the Jaguar, I've uncovered several previously undisclosed cheat codes. So, Bishop, podcast exclusive theme, if you please.
Now, for the first time ever.
Users of the PC version may know of a cheat code where you can enter in the company name Cooper Team and get everything unlocked with 100 million in cash and 16 fully upgraded agents. This code was disabled on the Jaguar, intentionally so, it would seem. It was disabled by renaming the code from Cooper Team to Cooper Team Not. So enter Cooper Team Not as your company name on the Jaguar and you get everything unlocked with a load of cash and 16 fully upgraded agents. If that seems like too much free stuff, try Alan's Team Not. This gives you the same as Cooper Team Not, but with only 8 fully upgraded agents. There's another one, Alan 2 Not, which is a whole lot like Cooper Team Not, except with a bank account of only 30,000 rather than the 100 million. No space between Alan and the number 2. If you wanted a good head start in the game, try entering Alan's Cities as the company name. It's just like starting from scratch in terms of money, research, and agents, except 40 of the 50 regions are already under your control and taxed at 30%. This is too much for some of the territories, like Venezuela and Peru, so you might have a revolt on your hands there after a few months. But wait, there's more. There's Credits Check 1, Credits Check 2, Credits Check 3, and Credits Check 4. No space between the word check and the numeral. When you enter one of these as your company name and then complete a level, you'll be treated to the various endings in the game, each followed by the full credits. In order, these are losing the game, winning the game, failing a mission, and completing a mission. Normally, of course, the game doesn't end when you complete a mission, but with these cheat codes, it sure does. There's one other cheat code that's present in the game, but I couldn't really tell what it did. That's Do It Again. I've seen this reported to repeat missions with previously obtained items, but it didn't let me repeat missions. And if I picked up a new item, I didn't get to keep it either. Maybe I misunderstood that one. Regarding bugs, aside from the choppiness and animation issues I mentioned earlier, I noticed that when you load a saved game, the new calendar starts with a month of 0. Normally, the lowest it can go is 1. Yeah, pretty groundbreaking stuff right there. Syndicate and Theme Park are both titles published by Ocean, so some of the packaging shares the same design language, but there are a couple exceptions. First of all, the artwork on the front of Syndicate's box doesn't stretch across the full width like Theme Park does. Instead, it's positioned so that it leaves a black strip along the left edge of the box, which the title overlaps. Both Atari and other third-party publishers have used this basic style, but I would have figured the two Ocean titles published at the same time would have the same style, but I guess I'm wrong there. There are two basic styles of box art for Syndicate on its various platforms. One largely blue-tinted with a wide-eyed head superimposed over a mid-80s looking populated circuit board, as well as a building with a hovering airship. That's not what the Jaguar uses. The Jaguar uses the other style, full-color artwork, showing a male agent with glowing white eyes drawing a pistol from within his body armor. Behind him, a giant advertisement billboard on a presumably pyramidal building, a tall tower, and an airship with spotlights overhead. Along the left side of the box, we have the Jaguar third-party hologram sticker, the Bullfrog logo, the Ocean logo, and the ESRB rating, kids to adults ages 6+. The screenshot in the bottom left corner shows, I think, the Central European level, but it's kind of hard to tell what's going on. Above the Jaguar logo on the right side of the box is a large yellow starburst reading, "The award-winning PC Smash game comes alive in brilliant 64-bit power." That's with 3 exclamation points. The back of the Syndicate box looks a lot like Theme Park's reverse, with text and bullet points along the left, and 4 staggered screenshots along the right. The screenshots show the configuration of a female agent, and 3 more gameplay examples. I would guess they're all from the first 3 missions. The headline reads, "Out here, it's you or them." And before you start to wonder if that's the answer to the question, who's going to buy the next round of ice cream? Here's the rest of the text. "A rival syndicate has gained full control of the population via a mind-altering techno-drug known as the chip. You are an ambitious executive in the Syndicate, handpicked to lead a team of chip-induced cyborg mercenaries on a quest to infiltrate and seize opposing Syndicate territories. Your mission? Assassinate, pillage, destroy, do whatever it takes to bring down competing agents, before they unleash their bloody assault on you." So it's not about ice cream. Got it. Here are the bullet points. "The original award-winning PC Smash brought to life with 64-bit power. Point-and-click interface puts you on the hunt immediately. More than 50 completely new missions. You've got a complete arsenal, including the infamous Persuadertron. Battle for supremacy in 50 different Syndicate territories from Mongolia to California." So, more than 50 completely new missions. The ones I spot-checked seemed pretty much identical to the PC version, so I wouldn't say they're completely new. New to the Jaguar, at least, or new coming from the 16-bit consoles. The back of the box also has an Ocean logo, a tiny Bullfrog logo, the Atari logo, and an explanation of the kids to adults rating, which reads animated violence. The cartridge label uses a crudely zoomed-in portion of the box art, showing the tower and airship. If you know what you're looking for, yeah, that's what it is, but if not, it's a chunky pixelated mess. More interesting is the back of the cartridge, which has the Atari logo embossed. At least mine does. Third-party carts aren't supposed to have that. They're supposed to be smooth. Theme Park is smooth, so why this one is embossed, I don't know. The manual is a thick, monochrome stapled booklet. The artwork on the front is heavily pixelated, like the cartridge label, and generally looks pretty terrible. Including the covers, the manual is 40 pages, and I don't think it makes very good use of available space. The agent from the box art, or I should say the agent from the pixely manual cover, takes up a good third of the outside edges of each page, leaving less room for text. And when you compare it to, say, the PC version's manual, the Jaguar's manual lacks some of the context and even humor from its edits for space. Appropriately for a manual this size, this one is divided into chapters. Chapter 1 is configuring your company, Chapter 2 is selecting a mission, Chapter 3 is preparing the team, Chapter 4 is playing a mission, Chapter 5 is after the mission, Chapter 6 is equipment and territories, and finally Chapter 7 is rival syndicates, which gives you a brief description of 7 different syndicates, which is technically superfluous, but helps with world building, I guess. Syndicate does not appear in the official Jaguar Gamer's Guide, but does appear in some magazine ads here and there. First up, the premiere issue of Ultimate Future Games, December 1994. This is a full-page ad commissioned by Ocean, and mentioning both the Super Nintendo and Jaguar. It features the artwork used on the box along the left side, and a synopsis with 4 little screenshots along the right. Looks like they're all the Super Nintendo version. Atari's own 2-page Best Games, Best System, Best Get Off Your Butt and Get One ad includes Syndicate to the left of the fold. This was in the May 1995 issues of both GamePro and Electronic Gaming Monthly, probably other publications as well. This includes a single screenshot, also of the Super Nintendo version, maybe Genesis, it's kind of hard to tell. It includes a couple of quotes here, one from Game Players, which says, "Jaguar strategy fans should be stoked, one of the best Jaguar games." The other quote is from GamePro, which says, "More than 50 missions of mayhem and mob activity." For an ad that includes a screenshot of the actual Jaguar version, 2 screenshots even, we look at the Atari-produced Jaguar promotional magazine. It includes a quote, not from a video game publication, but from Ocean of America, which says, "The award-winning PC Smash comes alive in brilliant 64-bit technology." It includes a quick write-up of the game, which I won't read here, but you can find this and the other ads I've mentioned in the show notes. Reviews of Syndicate on the Jaguar are generally quite positive. We'll begin as we usually do with Electronic Gaming Monthly, who gave it the full review crew treatment in their April 1995 issue. 4 reviewers on a scale of 1 to 10 gave the game 8, 7, and 2 6s. The consensus is that it's far better than the other console ports, likely meaning the Genesis, Sega CD, and Super Nintendo versions, rivaling the PC port. 3 of the reviewers mentioned the zoom ability, but all 4 mentioned confusing controls, which made it on their worst feature list. A couple said that the character animation was choppy. The best feature is great action, and they said the backup system is password-based, which is thankfully not the case here. GamePro, March 1995, has a full-page review of Syndicate by Manny La Mancha. He says the graphics are adequate, but they'll test your eyesight if you aren't using a crisp monitor with audio-video or Super VHS cables. It's virtually identical to the computer game, except that it's often slower than a worm in molasses. He closes out the review by saying, "It's hard to say that Syndicate is entirely enjoyable. If you have the patience to plod through the game's many missions and can overlook its flaws, Syndicate is a hit. If you're looking for Sonic-like speed, though, you'll put a contract out on it." Overall scores on a scale of 1 to 5 are graphics 4.0, sound 4.5, control 4.5, and fun factor 3.5. There are 6 pro tips here in this review. Well, 7, but the 7th one is basically just a walkthrough of the first level. The other pro tips are: be sure to keep researching new weapons and tools so you're prepared for the missions requiring advanced utilities. Don't get stuck in a car when enemies are firing. The resulting explosion isn't good for your agents. In the picture, you can see at least 3 agents on fire. I can personally attest to this too. The car had fewer hit points than I would have thought. You may want to sacrifice an agent by causing him to self-destruct as a suicide bomb amidst a crowd of enemy Syndicate agents. With adrenaline and intelligence set high and perception set low, your persuaded friends crowd around you and shield you from incoming bullets. Understand the restrictions of saving a game. For example, your taxes aren't stored at 1% intervals, so you may find them altered when you reload a saved game. Persuading a few cops to come along gives you added firepower in battles against enemy agents. Video Games, the Ultimate Gaming Magazine, April 1995, has a full-page review, which highlights the quote, "There's no suckiness here." The context behind this is that the reviewer had just finished covering the Genesis version, and he was expecting the Jaguar port likewise to suck. Fortunately, he wrote, "There's no suckiness here. Ocean has cranked out a near-perfect conversion of the PC game with a few graphic tricks to take advantage of the spiffy Jag hardware." There are a lot of comparisons with the Genesis port in this review. The Jaguar version is much easier to use, he says, thanks to the multitude of controller buttons. Also, it's a true conversion of the PC original with identical graphics and nearly identical sounds. He does mention the slowdown when the screen gets too busy, but says that the PC version had the same problem. He closes out the review by saying that Syndicate is still a game best played with a mouse, but the Jaguar version is a heck of a lot easier to play than the Genesis version, and it's much more faithful to the PC original. Ratings break down on a scale of 1 to 10, graphics 8, no intro but the in-game graphics are great. Sound and music also 8. The music is low, moody, and a bit hard to hear. So about that, I didn't mention this before, but when you boot up a game, the volume levels, both music and sound effects, are at 50%, so the game can seem quiet. Back to the scoring breakdown. Playability is an 8, Jag's buttons make a good mouse substitute, and the overall rating is an 8. There are 3 other quick reviews here. Both Gore and Nikos gave the game 9 out of 10, with Gore saying it's a sadistically enjoyable strategy, makes cruelty fun again. Jim, the other reviewer, gave it a 7, saying, it's a good conversion, but I expect more from the Jag. Game Players magazine, April 1995. This review shows a different ESRB rating than anywhere else. It shows M for mature ages 17+. Interesting. Anyway, this is a one-page review in which the reviewer, Trent Ward, calls this one of the best Jaguar games yet released. On a scale of 1 to 10, graphics are rated a 7, saying the far view lets you catch all of the action in a city block's radius, but you can't see any detail. Music and sound effects is given a 6, solid sound effects and soundtrack, but after a few minutes you've heard everything it has to offer. Innovation is given a 9 out of 10. Now, in Game Players, next to each category in the scoring breakdown, they tend to include a brief upside and a brief downside. For innovation, there are only upsides. One of the most unusual approaches to a strategy game, and everything about this game is unique. Gameplay is awarded 8 out of 10, tons of fun with just enough difficulty for most gamers, but what the game really needs is a mouse. Replay value is also given an 8, saying password feature lets you pick up where you left off, but finish the game and there's not much more to do afterwards. Just to reiterate, it's not a password system in Jaguar Syndicate, but rather save to cartridge. Passwords, like on the Super Nintendo version, are around 20 characters long, alphanumeric with hyphens. They're kinda ugly. Anyway, the overall rating from Game Players magazine is 78%. UK publication, Computer and Video Games, January 1995. They have a 2-page review of Syndicate with a load of screenshots, little tips, and editorial license. The reviewer says the Jaguar version is a bullet-by-bullet match to the PC original, though he says the close-up view is completely pointless. All it does is pixelate the graphics so you can't make out what's going on. He likes the zoomed-out view, though. The verdict reads, Jaguar Syndicate is a perfect conversion of the Amiga and PC originals, although, to my ear at least, some of the sound effects aren't quite as meaty as on the PC version. Still, that's a very minor fault in an otherwise excellent game. Using the Jag's joypad takes some getting used to, as the controls make full use of the telephone pad, but once you've got that cracked, the game's just as playable as ever. Uncensored, unaltered, and by far the best version of Bullfrog Syndicate to hit any console. On a scale of 1 to 100, he gives graphics 75, sound 82, playability 91, value 91, and overall 91, which matches the score they gave the Amiga version. There's a second opinion here, too, which says that the Jaguar version is leagues ahead of the 16-bit versions. However, he calls the zoom feature tricky to use and frankly pointless, and says that the Jag's overcomplicated joypad takes some getting used to, especially if you've played the game before with a mouse. Next Generation, April 1995, gives Syndicate 4 stars out of 5, saying that it's definitely one of the best titles available for the Jaguar, and that it's as close to the original title as is possible without the use of a mouse. Another UK publication, Atari World, reviewed Syndicate in their April 1995 issue, saying that it's probably best to have the manual handy and open on the controls page, and that the lack of a keypad overlay is a major omission in such a complex game. The graphics don't really do the Jaguar justice, he says, and the images look rather chunky and have surprisingly few colors. He liked the sounds, though, saying that the game offers a suitably moody soundtrack with lots of spot sound effects and samples. The review closes by saying, it's a shame to see such straight ports of existing games with little attempt to make use of the Jaguar's powerful sound and graphics. It's a competent game, but whether it's worth nearly £50 is questionable. Pros include 50-plus missions and plenty to do, but the cons are that graphics could be much better, and it's fiddly to control. Overall score 5 out of 10. Crossing the channel into mainland Europe, we find Arithius waiting with a batch of French and German magazine reviews which he not only gathered together, but also translated into English for us. We'll start with ST Magazine, May 1995. The translated conclusion reads, Syndicate is a fascinating game, easy at first, but the difficulty increases very quickly due to the vast numbers of parameters to manage. That is why it is imperative to read the manual. Fortunately, it is possible to save your progress after each mission in order to start from that point later on. The game uses all the buttons of the joypad, and the handling during the mission is okay once you get used to the controls. But the layout of the research and acquisition interface is questionable. It could have been simpler and more efficient at the same time, though you will get used to it. To conclude, an enjoyable game which is worth more than its 64% if you like the action strategy genre. Kind of ruined the suspense with the score there. Yeah, 64% overall, derived from graphics 50%, sound 65%, fluidity 65%, controls 60%, and interest. I guess the French word intérêt could be translated to appeal as well. Kind of like that better. Appeal 80%. Player One magazine, May 1995. The summary reads, light years from its 16 bits conversion, the Jaguar version retrieves the interest of the PC original, however, only for strategy fans. I'm guessing that's intérêt as well, so they'll say retrieves the appeal of the PC original? Anyway. Graphics, 85%. Good, you quickly believe you are in Blade Runner. Animation, 65%. Fast movement of the character, but the scrolling is slow and choppy. Sounds, 83%. The sound effects are quite nicely done, and the music is nice and adequate. Playability, 85%. Although it is quite delicate at the beginning, you quickly get used to the different button combinations. Overall score, or player fun score as they call it, 85%. Wolfen's opinion of the game reads like this. A game where you play as the villain has a certain appeal to me, and it is the case with Syndicate that it mixes strategy with good action. It would be all good if the game would have been specifically for a game console and not a microcomputer. Indeed, Syndicate is the perfect candidate for the mouse-keyboard combo. So, it is needless to say that even on the Jaguar, which has the merit to offer more buttons on the joypad, it quickly becomes ridiculous. As proof, I will tell you that to deselect a weapon, what do you have to press? C7-8. So, a strategy game that begins with this kind of puzzle is not for me. However, it cannot be denied that Syndicate is a really interesting game. So, if you like strategy games, think of the poor souls that tried this game on a 16-bits console. So, very quickly here, deselecting weapon is C and 7, whereas dropping weapon is C and 8. Both of these combinations are on my overlay design, but I think that might be a little too late for poor Wolfen. We'll head over to Germany now for some contemporary reviews, starting with Atari Inside from April 1995. Here's the core of the review, as kindly translated for us by Erythius. What luck that the Jag joypad has 17 keys, all of which have been used in Syndicate. Otherwise, one would certainly lose track of the many available functions. Syndicate's graphic presentation is acceptable or good enough, but the hard scrolling is annoying at first. Even the characters move very slowly when the gameplay becomes more complex. We do not get rid of the suspicion that the programmers once again mainly programmed this version with the 68,000. The 64-bit abilities of the Wildcat are only exploited when it comes to zooming in and out of the game in real time or to accompany the atmosphere with good sounds and good music. For strategists, Syndicate is certainly a long-term fun. Graphics 62%, sound 70%, and overall 70%. Next, ST Computer, June 1995. The summary reads, the game is really fun, and the speed problems, therefore the graphics rating is only average, do not bother in the long run because all missions are very exciting and varied. Once the player has grasped the controls, he will rush from mission to mission. Syndicate guarantees weeks of fun thanks to the 50 extensive missions. The only downside is the missing German manual. Graphics 50%, sound 35%, fun 90%, and overall 80%. It's quite a range there. Video Games, May 1995, includes this opinion. At first glance, few of you will recognize the difference between the PC version. Even a mouse cursor is simulated on the screen. Unlike the 16-bit versions, you enter the route of your troop in the beginning so that you can correct and adapt it depending on the location on the maps. Even when your 4-unit combat force is marching, you have enough time to carry out necessary directional corrections. A significant improvement over the SNES and Mega Drive variants, as this allows the player to focus on more important things such as mission goals, time, or strategic considerations. Graphics 76%, music 62%, sound effects 63%, and player fun 86%. Mega Fun, April 1995, courtesy of Google Translate, except for a few judgment calls I made in the translation. Syndicate can, at least as far as the gameplay is concerned, satisfy on the Jaguar. Once you've fought your way through the instructions and read the numerous commands, the apocalyptic mood, the individual scenarios, and the missions come across really well. Since all 17 buttons on the Jaguar pad are occupied, you never lose track of things. The sound or the sound effects not only serve as a background drone, but also supports the atmosphere and even announce certain situations. Only in terms of graphics and playability is the 64-bit version disappointing. The jerky background graphics have been raised to PC level, but the cyborgs move so slowly that you will lose your patience relatively soon. Strategy fanatics who can get used to the slow gameplay are still well advised with Syndicate. Overall score, 68%. Maniac, stylized with an exclamation point in place of the letter I, says this in their May 1995 review. Besides Theme Park, the English master coders have ported to the Jaguar their futuristic but yet complex shooting game. Do not expect any technical prowess or innovation. There are the 50 missions you already know from the other versions, the controls are based on the PC, annoying, and only a few settings gimmicks distinguish the Jaguar version from the other variants. For example, you can zoom into the cities and you can zoom out to adjust the viewing window on your screen. All 17 keys of the joypad are used here. This version makes no use of the graphics and sound capabilities of the Jaguar. The music gets brittle, the slideshow intro is missing, and instead of a password system, there is a memory battery save. Graphics, 60%, sound, 60%, player fun, 80%. Overall, I don't have a score for overall, I've got a sentence. It says, "The sluggish, wormish control reduces the fun of this tactically tinged and extensive agent slaughter." Atari Explorer Online for February 1995. UK correspondent Darren Dews Bates reviews this game, saying, "The JAG version is identical to its PC cousin, with smooth multi-directional scrolling and excellent detailed scenery, far outclassing other console versions. He likes the zoom feature, which is not on the PC, though concedes that zooming in is a little bit pixely. He goes on to say that the joypad configuration uses just about every button. This can cause some difficulty to begin with, but will be overcome after a bit of practice. This is a minor quibble that does not spoil this quality game. Overall, this is the best version of Syndicate yet." His scoring breakdown on a scale of 1 to 10 is graphics 7.5, sound 8.0, playability 9.0, and overall 9.0. Game Zero, May 1995, says the Jaguar port is almost a carbon copy of the original, but notes the missing animations from the PC version. "If you've never played this game through before and have a Jaguar," he says, "this is a must-buy." The Video Game Critic reviewed Syndicate in October of 2006, giving it a grade of D-, with the warning, "may cause drowsiness." He says that Syndicate has the most counterintuitive user interface he's seen in some time. Just navigating the mission briefings is a major hassle. It's a plodding strategy game that requires the patience of a saint to master, and he calls the constant loading screens a real annoyance. Reader reviews give Syndicate a C+ average with 32 votes. The Atari Times, April 2007, gives the game an 80% overall rating, breaking it down to graphics 60%, sound and music 80%, gameplay 90%, and control 60%. The reviewer, Bruce Clark, says, "The first time I tried to play Syndicate, I had no manual or overlay, and I gave up in frustration. When I decided to give this game another chance, I found a copy of the manual on the web. After giving the instructions a thorough reading, I sat down and forced myself to learn the many controls. It took some time, but I found Syndicate is worth it. If you are patient and looking for a deeper game on the Jaguar, Syndicate is fantastic." 2 of the 3 comments on this review say that the game is hard to get into. The third, incidentally, hasn't played the game but finds the game concept awesome. Finally, we'll close up the reviews with the French blog JagFan from April 2011. This is not without flaws and requires a patience that only the elite DOS strategy game fans may have, or some crazy people like me. But Syndicate gathers so many fresh ideas at the time of its release that it is good to rediscover its Blade Runner-esque decadent and futuristic atmosphere. The score here is 3 out of 5. Atari Age gives Syndicate on the Jaguar a rarity of 4 out of 10, and checking out prices current as of the end of January 2021, I see it listed on Video61 new for $99.95, Limit 1, and on eBay recent sales have gone for $15 to $32 loose and around $60 complete. I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about some of the other ports of Syndicate and how they differ. Not a lot of time, I won't do an exhaustive comparison, but just some highlights. I'm going to divide Syndicate into 3 main camps: computer ports played with a mouse, 16-bit consoles, and 32 or 64-bit consoles. Computer ports include Amiga, DOS, FM Towns, PC-98, and Macintosh. They're all pretty similar, though I admit I didn't really look at each one in detail, but graphics are about the same. Some have more colors on screen than others, and control is about the same. For the 16-bit consoles, it's a very different game. You don't control a cursor, you control the actual agents and use combinations of buttons to change between them. The team selection screens look totally different with rows of icons along the bottom instead of text buttons, and the graphics in-game are kind of cartoony. There's no blood, either. I didn't try setting anybody on fire or anything like that, though. The levels are different too, at least the couple that I checked out. It's definitely Syndicate, but so unlike the computer versions that if you came from the Amiga or DOS, you'd be sorely disappointed. 3DO and Jaguar are very similar, though the 3DO being on a CD has much better music. Here's a quick sample. You have all the same control limitations on the 3DO that you have on the Jaguar, except worse. Both shoulder buttons are used as separate shift keys, so getting used to the combinations of buttons has got to be difficult. While there was an official 3DO mouse, both Panasonic and Logitech made nearly identical mice for the 3DO, Syndicate does not support it, which is a shame. The CD32 port of Syndicate kind of straddles the line between the computers and the consoles. You can control the game with the CD32's distinctive gamepad, but unlike the 3DO port, you can plug an Amiga mouse into controller port 2 and control much of the game that way. You still need the gamepad for a few things, but given the option of using the mouse, I'd have to say that if you were looking for the best console port of Syndicate, CD32 is probably the way to go. It's basically the Amiga ECS version on a CD, though, so not only did it not take advantage of the CD32's AGA chipset, it was also delayed for years, so when it finally did come out, many CD32 owners were disappointed. Touching briefly on other games in the series, an expansion pack, American Revolt, came out for the Amiga and DOS, adding 21 new missions as well as dedicated multiplayer missions. If you'll remember, the multiplayer option from the original Syndicate was yanked at the last minute due to synchronization issues, but the American Revolt expansion adds that back in. It wasn't very well received, though, American Revolt, because of the high difficulty, the lack of new features, and some rough edges in the level design. The Syndicate, which is available on Good Old Games, GOG.com, is called Syndicate Plus, and contains both the original and this expansion. Syndicate Wars, which takes place about 100 years after the events of Syndicate, was released on PC, Macintosh, and PlayStation in 1996. It's a full 3D environment where you can rotate the playfield around, so you aren't limited to the fixed isometric viewpoint. In 2012, Syndicate was rebooted on Windows, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. This was a first-person shooter with support for cooperative multiplayer, and violent enough to be banned in Australia, as I understand it. Coming up next, we have my take on Syndicate for the Jaguar and listener feedback, so stick around. I don't think there was any game on my list that I was looking forward to covering less than Syndicate. This was my brother's game, he bought it, and I've had it in my collection now for well over a decade, but I've never plugged it in. I didn't have any interest in doing so. Seeing Syndicate in magazines, it didn't pique my interest. It looked dark and uninteresting, complicated. But you gotta do what you gotta do, so after finishing up with Super Burnout, I pulled Syndicate out of the drawer, plugged it in, and was pretty quickly underwhelmed and confused. The controls weren't right, and it took way longer than it should have to figure out how to navigate the menus. My brother didn't keep the manual, apparently, and Syndicate, it's the kind of game that screams for a manual. So I plodded through and eventually figured out what made the game tick. It was not a good experience. To help with my research, I bought the DOS version of the game off GOG.com, where it was on sale for $1.50. I'd made some sales recently on the Jaguar Game by Game podcast store. A Jaguar fan out there bought a block diagram acrylic block and a wall clock with the Jaguar slash marks and a t-shirt. If you're listening, American Jaguar fan, I hope you really like those things. I hope they bring a smile to your face, because that's what it's all about. And a little money in my PayPal account to help fund the podcast. That's good too. Anyway, I bought the DOS version, which it says only works on Windows, but I was able to extract the files and get it to work on Linux with DOSBox just fine. I don't really do Windows. I had no trouble getting into the game under DOS. The cumbersome navigation on the Jaguar is simply non-existent, and controlling everything is a breeze. It's an absolute joy in comparison, both in setting up the mission and working through the mission. It's a much more enjoyable experience using a keyboard and mouse. Mostly it's just the mouse. Take something simple like entering the company name. I can go on DOS and be done, but on the Jaguar I'm very slowly trying to methodically enter each letter. Sometimes it doesn't take my input, so it's even slower. Go too fast and you make mistakes because the D-pad action is so imprecise. And when you hit C to erase the last letter, it'll often erase more than one, even if you very quickly tap the C button. I get what they're doing with a flashing border indicating which part of the screen is active on the directional pad and A button. It kind of works, but the problem is that there's so much flashing on the screen. The menu items are flashing, the borders are flashing, and this creates a confusing mess. You end up pushing the B button, then waiting to see what's flashing, and then pushing it again because what's flashing isn't what you want, and the end result is a painful navigation experience. The video game critic is absolutely right when he says that even navigating the mission briefing is a major hassle. Once I finally got into the game, into the actual missions, it took too long to figure out how to, say, draw your weapon. That's on page 17 of the manual. So my agents are standing around oblivious while they're getting shot at, and the guy they're supposed to assassinate just strolls over to his hover car and floats away, nary a bead of sweat on his brow. I have to admit it felt like a major accomplishment when I had sufficient grasp of the controls just to beat the first level. On to the second level, where you need to persuade a couple key civilians to follow you out. How does the Persuadertron work exactly? I select it with the 7 button, I put my crosshairs over the person, push the fire button, and nothing happens. It's a close proximity thing. You walk into them with the Persuadertron selected rather than point and shoot. It doesn't help that they're inside buildings and that seem to be divided into rooms that you can't actually see. I would try to direct my agent in the building over to where the mark is, only to have him casually saunter out of the building and walk around the side. No, that's not what you're supposed to be doing. Gah. But I got the hang of it and had some fun persuading other civilians. Join me, it is the only way. Neat. I make my way over to the extraction zone, get all my agents and new civilian buddies into the circle, and nothing happens. It turns out you can only persuade so many people at a time, and I guess it's a first in, first out sort of scenario, so my marks were free of my grasp and able to mingle with the rest of the population. The scanner didn't tell me where they were. I don't think they looked any different. I could be wrong, but I ended up having to just retry the mission. The next time through, I was careful not to persuade anybody I didn't want to, and after arriving at the extraction point, I still couldn't complete the mission. Turns out that one of my persuaded civilians got lost on the way out, and I had to take my agent and go track him down. How did he get lost? It's not like the agents move with any sense of urgency. But I finally got the gang together and was able to move on. The third mission, and don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of them, this is the last one I'll do. You pile your agents in a car and go hunting down other agents. I had a hard time getting the car to go where I wanted. It would often take some weird, circuitous route to go from point A to point B, even though point B is on the same side of the road and just a little bit ahead. Or so I thought. But it turns out the enemy agents are smart enough to know that my car is full of adversaries, but dumb enough to just walk right out in front of the car. I took out 4 agents that way, driving around on a path I didn't really want to take until my car took enough damage that it exploded, and my agents ran out screaming. I had to start that mission over again too. There's a learning curve here, made worse by the clunky and confusing controls. It was not enjoyable. Other missions, I would get myself into an unwinnable position. It happened a lot. One time I was just messing around and persuaded a guy I was supposed to assassinate. There's no friendly fire in Syndicate. You can't torch your own guys, nor can you hurt anybody who's been persuaded, so I had to 1 and 3 to withdraw and start over. There is no way to win. Expect that as you work your way through the game. Oh wait, about the friendly fire thing, it is possible to kill your own agents by running them over with a car. Ask me how I know. Enough whining, though, let's do a breakdown. Here's what I like about Syndicate. If you don't look too closely, it feels like you're in a living, breathing city. People walk around, enter buildings, cross the street at the crosswalk, stuff like that. It's pretty cool. I really like seeing the billboards too, way more than I do in real life. There is so much flexibility here, balancing research, equipment, modifications, your team in general, how you approach the missions. Syndicate is a lot of game for your quatloos, a lot of depth. Unlike Theme Park, I think the save system works pretty well here. It doesn't save everything, certainly, but it saves enough that you feel like you're making real progress. I don't know how far my brother got. When I tried to load the save game off the cartridge, it got an EEPROM read failed error, but subsequent saves and loads worked okay. In Cannon Fodder, I complained about how irritating it is to load a saved game. It's definitely not quick when all you want to do is get back in there and try again, but in Syndicate, loading up a saved game is a breeze. You could do a star hash reset, but then you'd have to wait through the Ocean logo and title screen, but once you reach the main menu, it's a quick hop down to load the game, and you're in. 10 seconds max, 8 of those waiting for the main menu to load. Alternately, you could do a 1 and 3 to bail on a mission, right on the D-pad to go to the main menu, and then the load. I timed that at 4 seconds, tops. If you lose your entire team, which you will, it's not a big deal to bring them all back like it never happened, and I like that. Also, while I'm making comparisons to Cannon Fodder, Syndicate lets you save after every mission, whereas Cannon Fodder makes you complete a set of missions before you can save. Heck, you can save multiple times between missions if you want. Say you unlock some new item through research, or you have your team equipped just so, you can save it before re-entering a mission. Samples and weapon sounds are pretty good, and the Gauss gun, while it does slow things up quite a bit, it does look pretty cool. Cheat codes, glorious, wonderful cheat codes. What would I do without them? Now for what I don't like. Menu navigation is a confusing, irritating, inconsistent pain. Maybe you can get used to it, but I didn't. Since a good portion of the game takes place outside the playfield, that's a real problem. I hate the music. Theme Park has worse, granted, but Syndicate's music is pretty bad too. The tracks are short, thin, synthetic for the most part. I eventually just turn them off, which reminds me, volume settings and whether or not the music is active, these parameters aren't saved to the cartridge like they are on other Jaguar games. Yeah, actual game progress is definitely the priority, but it's worth pointing out. They don't even persist across a soft reboot. Sometimes the agents go where I tell them, and sometimes they don't, or they take a weird path to get there. It's probably my fault for being a poor leader, not giving them clear instructions, but it happened enough that I felt I should mention it here. No keypad overlay. If there was ever a game that needed an overlay, it's Syndicate. Let's talk about that ESRB rating. Many of the reviews talk gleefully about the unabashed violence in the game. One publication called it hyperviolent, which, when you're mowing down civilians without consequence or setting them on fire, it seems like an accurate adjective. Yet the ESRB rating was kids to adults? Dragon the Bruce Lee story, for crying out loud, is rated T for teen. Somebody at the ESRB was asleep at the wheel here, I think. The graphics are short on color, and the menus are as bland as they could be. The DOS version has neat little animations when the menus are drawn out, which really does make them more interesting, but on the Jaguar it's just page after page of green on green. The slowdown makes the game crazy frustrating at times. Yeah, maybe the PC version running on a 486 did this as well. I think one review said that it did, and another said that it didn't, but it's not something that I can independently verify. I do own a 486, but it's loose in a little cardboard box next to the 386 in the Pentiums.
Edit.
After I recorded this episode, I was working on a totally unrelated project and came across a PC emulator called, well, PCM. That's PCEM. The really cool thing about the software is that you can precisely narrow down what kind of hardware you want to mimic down to the specific CPU, video card, BIOS, and other accessories. I used this software to pretty accurately recreate my first own PC, a Packard Bell Legend 316SX, and I also did my next two computers, an Acer Acros 486 and a generic Pentium I built myself, with the exact clock speed, memory usage, video card, and hard drive size, floppy and CD-ROM configuration, even down to the 387 math coprocessor I added to that Packard Bell. Anyway, after getting the appropriate version of MS-DOS, Windows, Sound Blaster, and games installed, it occurred to me that I could fairly realistically see what playing Syndicate on a 486 was actually like. My Acer Acros, when I first traded with my mom to get it, that story's in the Doom episode, it was a 486 SX25 with 4 megabytes of RAM and a Sound Blaster 16. Playing Syndicate on that machine, recreated virtually but otherwise very much to spec, was super smooth. Levels that felt sluggish on the Jag were just fine on the 486. The 386, on the other hand, was unplayable at 16 MHz, and only marginally playable when I cranked it up to 33 MHz, which is, as it turns out, the minimum system requirements for the DOS port, taking a look at the PC box. So the Jaguar, I'd have to say, does better than the 386, but definitely not as good as the 486. For some extra perspective, the DOS version requires 4 megabytes of RAM and takes up just shy of 11 megabytes of disk space. The Jaguar console has 2 megabytes of RAM, and Syndicate is on a 2 megabyte cartridge, so it could be considered a genuine accomplishment to have Syndicate running on the Jaguar, even without the extra animations that you find on the other platforms, which, by my count on the PC, take up about 6 of those 11-ish megabytes. But taken on its own, Syndicate is just so slow on the Jaguar, not just the visuals and animations, but also in responding to button presses. So, yeah, I've got to agree with a video game critic who says that the game requires the patience of a saint.
End of edit.
The No Swear Gamer scale is what I use on the show to rate the games that I cover, and it's a simple human scale rating system. Games can be either solid or meh, or on the outside they can be Hall of Fame or trash for the 5 titles on either end of the spectrum. Syndicate going in was a meh. It's not a genre I particularly enjoy, but once you pile on the control issues and the other cons I listed, I think that pushes this down to a trash rating for me, I'm afraid. Playing the game with a mouse, I could totally see, but here on the Jaguar, I'm afraid it's just one big nope sandwich as far as I'm concerned. That said, this is the 4th trash rating for me, and I've got my 5th and final trash pick coming up in a future episode. There are a few games that I haven't played yet, so it's possible that one of those will score below Jaguar Syndicate on my personal trashometer and push Syndicate up to a meh. We'll just have to wait and see, and if that's the case, I expect Bishop will, somewhere down the road, break in with an edit right about now. Nothing? Okay, so trash it is. But that's just my opinion. What's your take? On social media, nothing, actually. No feedback on the game itself. I got a couple of comments on Twitter when asking for feedback. Matthew says, "This makes me happy." Thank you, Matt. And R2 says, "Worth the wait." Yes, there was a long wait, a long period of silence, and that's probably the problem here. I don't want to ask for feedback on social media until I feel like I'm on the home stretch in terms of podcast research, so that the date I give out for the feedback deadline is likely to stick. And it was a week after I felt ready to do so that I actually did so. That might explain the lack of engagement on social media. That or Syndicate isn't that popular a game on the Jaguar, so we'll move on. On the forums, Atari Age, RJ wrote, "Syndicate was over-involved and controls were over-complicated. PC platform games didn't port well to the Jag. I only ever got to the mission where you used the Persuadertron." That's not very far in, but I get your point, and other opinions I've read have expressed similar difficulty. Thanks, RJ. The Lost Dragon shares a quote from developer Mike Diskett talking about the slowdown. "Syndicate and Theme Park are both very simulation-heavy games designed to run on a high-end 486 at the time, and even on PCs suffer slowdowns. Without a major simplification of the game, it was never going to run at a constant, great frame rate. With more time, we could have made it run better, but I guess projected unit sales were so low that it wasn't worth the business guys at Bullfrog having us spend more time and maybe make a loss on making the games." Mr. Dragon goes on to write, "I was okay with the controls. Jaguar Pad was never going to replace a mouse, and I could only play PlayStation XCOM on Syndicate Wars, etc. with a PS mouse. N64 Command & Conquer I found unplayable with that controller. There was a pointless zoom feature on the Jaguar Syndicate that had me scratching my head. I made it to the final mission on Jag Syndicate, never beat the damn thing, mind." Yeah, the zoom feature is kind of pointless, but this is going to sound weird, but even though I never really used the zoom feature, like actually used it, it was nice knowing that it was there. Otherwise, I might have felt some claustrophobia with a limited viewing angle, but knowing that I could zoom out if I wanted to, that was okay. And I totally get Mr. Diskett's point about sinking further resources into improving games that weren't likely to sell well anyway. It's a balancing act, and I guess the albatross around the Jaguar's neck. Dr. Clue wrote, Syndicate I remember seeing for the Jaguar and did pick up a copy to try. I smiled remembering the hours my friends played this in college on a PC and was a bit proud to brag to them that the Jaguar also had the title. I think I planned to play it more once I beat Cannon Fodder, and darn it, while stuck on that game, the war is just so much fun. Thanks, Doctor. Did you actually try out Syndicate on the Jaguar, though? I'm curious what you thought about it, given that you were pretty familiar with the PC version. Probably should have asked that on Atari Age before now. I'm generally pretty terrible about following up on things like this. I had respond to feedback on my to-do list for a while until it became no longer timely to do so. I'm sorry, I really am. PFG 9000 wrote, Syndicate. As much as I love AVP and Tempest 2000, Syndicate might be my favorite game on the Jaguar. It's true the controls are complicated, and I think that makes it hard for many fans to get into Syndicate. But if you can learn the controls, there is a ton of fun to be had. I think Syndicate is a great example of the Jaguar's controller being used wisely. That number pad can serve more of a function than just selecting your weapons quickly in Doom, which is already more than contemporary controllers could do. Some of the other console ports of Syndicate had to be completely retooled from the PC version just to be functional on a controller, but the Jaguar version lets you direct your agents in different directions, shoot at different targets, scroll through available weapons and inventory, and adjust each agent's drug levels individually, all with relative ease, but only once you've mastered those controls. For me, the joy in Syndicate lies in building your corporation from a tiny fledgling operation to a global powerhouse. Initially, you're outnumbered and outgunned almost everywhere you go, but by the end of the game you have superpowered agents, top-of-the-line tech, and insanely powerful weapons. Shinto, I've played through Syndicate beginning to end at least 3 times. I'm pretty familiar with it. If there's anything I can help you with, please let me know. I've been looking forward to this episode of the podcast for years. Oh man, PFG. I've probably really let you down and turned you off the podcast forever. I really didn't like this one at all, and I don't feel like, in general, I did a very good job on this episode. I do agree with a lot of what you said, though, about the controls relative to other ports, and the progression you feel building up your Syndicate. I caught a glimmer of that while playing, but then the frustration kicked back in and squashed that glimmer into the ground, repeatedly. If I were younger, maybe I could have gotten into the game more, but I could only play this in short bursts, one level at a time, and it didn't hold my interest. But I really do appreciate your feedback, and I hope you continue listening and contributing despite my trash rating for Syndicate. Triple D79 says, I had Syndicate for quite some time. I never could figure out the controls. It was just too confusing no matter how much I referenced the manual. How did this get released without an overlay? Way too many button combinations to pull off what should be a basic function. Ultimately, I feel this was a PC game that should not have made the jump to consoles. I sold this game on eBay last year and have no intention of trying this one again. I'll just stick to Theme Park for my sim fix. I really feel, Triple D, that this is a vastly better game on the PC. I understand the concessions, I get what they were trying to do here, but I don't think it worked out. The button combinations are a necessary evil. I tried to think of a way that they could have done this better, but other than bundling a mouse with the game, which would have added $10 to the price tag easy, not to mention the R&D and manufacturing, I couldn't come up with a better control scheme. MightyFrog wrote about the previous episode, Great episode as always, Shinto. Super Burnout is a favorite, so I was really looking forward to this one. Syndicate is a game I also never had any interest in, but sometimes learning about those are some of the most fun listens. Thanks for pushing on through the pandemic. As someone who has also been working more than ever, I sympathize with the jealousy of friends and family who have so much free time. And I don't have the luxury to work from home, aforementioned food and beverage production, so be thankful for that at least. I am thankful for the ability to work from home, MightyFrog. I'm very lucky, and I hope that you're able to stay safe and healthy through all this. Cubanismo says in reply to, well, maybe I should back up. Earlier, Cubanismo said, I'm still relatively new to the Jaguar, and I was worried this podcast was going to be yet another thing I found just after everyone else was done caring about it. I'm only 3 or 4 episodes in, but I love it. Keep them coming. I'll see if I can catch up before Syndicate comes out. Smiley face. And RJ responded to the last sentence saying, well, it was a 9-month stretch last time around. Smile, smirk, wink. And then a phonetic pronunciation, Herzog zwei. What did I say? Bishop?
You said, and I quote,
Herzog zwei. Okay, fair point. Anyway, Cubanismo replied to the 9-month stretch line saying, indeed, it turns out it only took me around 3 months to catch up. Now I have to go dig out more CDs from my late 90s only collection to put on the VLM while I solder or work out instead of listening to this. This is the first podcast I've listened to more than an episode or two of, and I like it more and more, which makes it all the more difficult to wait for the next episode now. That said, as someone working from home with 2 young kids who don't entertain themselves, yet trying to squeeze in some Jaguar hobbying of my own now and then, I certainly know how it goes. No rush, take care of what's important first. I don't have anything to contribute for Syndicate, but I'm super excited to hear about it nonetheless. There have been a couple of episodes that got me interested in playing games that I'd written off as not my thing or not worth the time. I picked up enough general negativity around Valdezare, for example, that I probably never would have even bothered flashing it to my skunk to give it a try until this podcast, and now it's one of my go-to games to unwind with. Even for the games I don't end up getting into, I still find the historical bits really interesting and worth a listen. Keep up the good work and looking forward to that Jaguar CD coverage. On a more personal note, when I say working out above, I really mean doing a bunch of very tedious stretches and resistance exercises prescribed by my physical therapist for a very minor but lingering hip injury. I hate doing this. I prefer to be out running, biking, or snowboarding to get my exercise, but I can't really do that until I've recovered. Listening to the podcast while I go through the routine makes it a little more bearable. I'm nearing a full recovery now, and I probably couldn't have stuck to it as well as I did without that backlog of episodes, so thanks. Cubanismo, that is awesome. I am so humbled that you enjoy the show and that it's been at least some help in getting through your physical therapy. Valdezare, I didn't realize there was that much negativity around the game, but I admit I am not active on Atari Age or other forums, and I had a fairly middling impression of the game until working on the episode and discovering that the game actually had power-ups on later slopes. It's a fun little game, and spending a lot of time in the game for the podcast helps me appreciate it more than I previously did. And even if I still end up not liking the game, at least I understand it better than I did before starting on the episode. But thank you so much for your feedback and your understanding in my somewhat irregular release schedule. Hey, Bishop, do we have any text or audio submissions about Syndicate?
We do. 2 text and 1 audio submission, which you missed last time.
No, that one was your fault. Queuing up feedback is your job.
No, it was your fault.
No, it was your fault.
No, it was your...
Would you just...
What are you doing, Shinto?
Hold on.
It was all my fault.
Yeah.
I hate you.
Okay, I can live with that.
For now.
Hey, can you send those text submissions over to my screen, please?
Ready.
Okay, our first text submission is from Kyle. He says, "Welp, I just couldn't do it. After several hours of no manual gameplay and several hours of printouts in my lap, I had to put the controller down and admit that Syndicate got the best of me. Ironically, I was super excited about this episode due to the fact that I was a huge fan of the EA first-person shooter remake. Ironic, the reboot got me excited for the original, but my patience ran out eventually. I even went so far as to print out a manual, but all it turned into was looking down at the manual, looking at the corresponding button on the controller, and then trying to follow the action on the screen. I did this for hours. I did manage to complete 2 missions, but it simply wasn't worth it in the end. I'm sorry I can't contribute more to a game so high on my internal list, but this game ended up being trash to me. It's one of those titles that perhaps may move up to meh based on this beautiful library we are exploring. Perhaps a more patient person would rate this several categories higher, but I can't. It's trash for now." On to more positive feedback. As stated in my previous email, I wanted to go back and give a few words on games previously covered by yourself. Why not start at the beginning, Cybermorph? What can I really add to this game that hasn't been already said? That being said, I'll give it a whirl. I actually really like this game. Surprise! Take all the Star Fox comparisons and shove them. This game is about exploration, careful flight navigation, and tactical planning based on the enemies on the board. For some reason I played it as a high-score game as well, covering the entire playing field until all structures were gone and all points were collected. Slow and steady wins the race in this game. For a 1993 game, the graphics are rock solid, and when I take my child's mind back to that time, I can still enjoy what I am playing. The only real gripe I have regarding the game is that the boss battles feel tagged on. You spend hours slowly approaching enemies, carefully trying not to draw attention to them, and boom, ultra-aggressive boss fights. I'm not buying it. If I lose, I just move on to the next set of planets. I don't consider it fair and won't play their game. Rant over. But as stated, Cybermorph is a game to me that the more you give it, the more you get back from it. My wife can't stand the flight commentary, but I digress. I hope others can find it as fun as I have. Sorry my review is not more exciting, but admittedly it is not an overly exciting game in theory or practice. A labor of love. If I am not mistaken, Rayman is next, and oh boy, I can't wait for the episode. I have the game CIB, have played dozens of hours in multiple versions, a worthy discussion point if there ever was one for a game, and eventually plan on beating it. That's all right until your episode comes out, and then provide feedback. Thanks for the great podcast, and I look forward to the next. Thank you, Kyle. That's an interesting perspective coming originally from Syndicate, the first-person shooter. I haven't played that one, I just watched a few minutes of gameplay footage on YouTube, so I didn't have much to say about it. It seemed to me that the premise was similar, but implementation totally different. The gameplay footage I watched takes place indoors. I would have been really interested to see what the cities looked like, the cyberpunk theme. Maybe I should watch it some more. I think you could pick up the PC or Amiga versions of Syndicate without a manual, at least get the gist of the game and complete some early missions. But any port that doesn't use a mouse, I don't see it. Too much trial and error figuring out the keypad without an overlay, and the button cording. Even with the manual, you'd have to print out pages 16, 17, and 18 just to cover most of the button assignments. It's kind of tiring. I agree with your assessment of Cybermorph, though I can't say I remember much about the boss battles. It has been 5+ years since I last played it. Well, I take that back. I was able to get my hands on the 1 megabyte version and playtest some differences, and I'm planning on putting in a couple of drop-in edits with my findings. Club Drive, too, I've got like 3 additions I need to make to that one. Rayman is next. I've been stuck on the same level in Rayman for many years, so it's not one I'm likely to finish, but it should be an interesting game to talk about. The second text submission is from Lewis regarding the Super Burnout episode. Here's what he wrote. Hi Shinto, I love the Super Burnout episode, but I have a couple technical corrections about the music engines. You're correct that whatever music format Super Burnout uses is higher quality than mod, but mod does indeed have higher quality samples than 8 kHz. Keep in mind 8 kHz is barely sufficient for intelligible speech, much less a harmonic-rich instrument. For listeners who are unfamiliar with digital audio geekery, the higher the rate, the more accurate highs you have in the sound. So you might be able to get away with 8 kHz for a bass guitar, but not so much for, say, a violin, and definitely not a triangle. No, mod samples tend to be around 16 kHz for melodic instruments, and much higher for drum samples which don't need to be pitched. They can be as high as 28 kHz. To put that in perspective, the sound effects in Doom and Quake tend to be around 11 kHz. Now, if you had loaded the mod files into an editor, it probably did report the samples as being 8 kHz. This is because the mod format, unlike later formats, does not store sampling rate for each sample. The sample rate is chosen simply by playing that sample at different pitches. There is, however, a fine-tune control for each sample, thank God. If you want to see about what rate each sample is, I remember Impulse Tracker for DOS having a screen where it'll show you which rate each channel is going at during playback. This would give you an accurate sense of the sampling rates in each instrument. There is one more sampling rate concern for a music engine like the ones on the Jaguar or an old PC, the mixing rate. This is the limiting factor for all instruments playing, regardless of the rates they were sampled at. The higher the rate, the more precious CPU you're blowing on music, but the nicer the quality of the entire mix. P.S. Did you say in Super Burnout which format was used? Was it XM or was it their own? It really does sound great for the time. Few cartridge games sound as nice, even on later systems. Doesn't it absolutely kill you that Jag Doom didn't have in-game music? They did a great job on the tunes and on the rest of the ports. Can you imagine if it all went together perfectly? Hi Lewis, let me go through your points in order. What I did to determine the sampling rate of the Tempest 2000 mod files was I used Schism Tracker, which is kind of an open source clone of Impulse Tracker. I loaded in one of the mod files and exported a couple of the samples to disk in the WAV format. I then analyzed the resulting file to see that it was in the 8 kHz range. But I see your point. I can go into Schism Tracker's sample editor and change the reported rate by increasing or decreasing the pitch. It lets you shift it 1 octave at a time in either direction. And when you export a sample that's been modified in such a way, it comes out like 16 kilohertz on the other side, 1 octave higher. Several episodes ago, when I covered Cannon Fodder, I made a remix of the infamous theme song. I did that as a pure mod file. I recorded myself singing my alternate Jaguar-themed lyrics, broke that recording into individual samples, and swapped out the samples in the mod file, just a straight-up replacement. I used 22 kHz for my samples, and Schism Tracker pulled them in just fine, replacing the 8 kHz originals without having to muck with the pitch. So yeah, if I said in the Super Burnout episode that mod files only supported 8 kHz samples, I misspoke, because I know from personal experience, fairly recent experience, that they can do better. But I'm confused here. At the same pitch as my 22 kHz samples, the speech in the Cannon Fodder theme song mod does show 8 kHz. Does that not mean that it's an 8 kHz sample? Here's one sample, original, and my version back to back.
So much fun!
So much fun! Definitely a difference in sound quality, excluding, of course, the innate quality of my voice, or lack thereof. Maybe I'm conflating sampling rate with mixing rate, though that sounds like something I'd do. I didn't say which format Super Burnout used because I couldn't find out. I made the comparison with XM because it sure sounds like XM, but it's entirely possible it was something custom for their own custom Banshee audio sound system. As for Doom, in my episode I put together kind of a what-if recording that mixed the music with the sound effects, but it might not be pure fantasy for long, thanks to the Doom Slayer edition, which is in the works by several clever and talented folks on Atari Age. It adds in the music and many other enhancements, and my plan is to put together a special episode, an out-of-sequence episode of the podcast, once the Slayer edition is available. I'll put a link to this project in the show notes. Thank you so much, Lewis, for your feedback and for geeking out over audio. It was funny when I discovered Schism Tracker, even though it was a couple decades or so removed from my days using Impulse Tracker, how many keyboard functions I still remembered, almost by muscle memory. I remember playing a song and instinctively hit F9 to stop without really thinking about it. Whoa. Impulse Tracker, if you're not familiar, was a DOS program that functioned exclusively with the keyboard, every key with Control and Alt and stuff. I'm pretty sure it was keyboard only. That's all I ever used, at least. Our audio submission is from Bobby Tribble. There's some text to go along with it, so I'll read that first. Bobby says, "Hi Shinto, I'm glad to hear at long last the latest show. I'm realizing as more shows go by, even though I was a huge Atari and Jaguar fan, that I haven't really played a lot of the games. Not Super Burnout, definitely not Syndicate. I should really check out some of these via emulation. But anyway, I think my submission was overlooked in the last show, either that or it was deemed not relevant and deleted by Bishop. A definite possibility. I do also plan on recording some more submissions, hopefully after playing some of the featured games. Alright, let's roll the tape.
This is my first time leaving an audio submission, so I thought it would be a good idea to talk about my favorite Jaguar games. Just kidding. Actually, I want to talk about licensing and digital distribution. In your after-show segment for Theme Park, you were talking about the 2009 Tetris for PSP, PlayStation Portable, and lamenting its 2014 delisting from the online PlayStation Store. You basically said, hey, why remove it? Don't they want to make money? Well, this being the internet, I'm sure lots of people have jumped at the opportunity to inform you, or correct you, or feel good about themselves, so I will too. But first, let me talk at great length about Tetris. This will eventually get to the Jaguar. Kind of. So anyone who was around in the late 80s remembers how much of a breakout sensation Tetris was. PCs were just becoming more graphically powerful, and yet, here comes a game that is so simple, yet utterly engrossing. Everyone was jumping to get their version of Tetris out there. The first time I personally remember seeing Tetris was the Spectrum Holobyte PC version. In Japan, Bulletproof Software released their computer ports. Soon after, Atari and Sega got the rights from the Tetris creators, and Atari made its fairly well-known arcade version in the US, and Sega made its lesser-known Japanese version in the arcades. Bulletproof made a Famicom version, Tengen made a wonderful port of the Atari arcade to the NES, and Sega, because they are service games, made a serviceable port of their arcade to the Mega Drive. However, Nintendo went over all of their heads and scooped up the home console rights to Tetris from the Russian government. This forced all of those versions to be recalled, and Nintendo's own NES version became the only game in town. Bulletproof Software did alright though. Soon after, they programmed perhaps the most well-known version of Tetris for the Game Boy. So, where does the Jaguar fit into this? Hold on, I'm not there yet. Nintendo had a good run making a number of Tetris games, but nowadays the rights to Tetris belongs to the Tetris Company LLC, who licenses any modern versions of the game. The Tetris Company actually makes more demands about the game than you might think. The game must take place on a 10 by 20 field. That makes sense. The game packaging must use the official T-shaped Tetris logo. Fair enough. The piece shapes must be their official designated colors, yellow square, etc. A ghost outline must be used to see where the piece drops. A hold space for a piece must be utilized. The player must be able to rotate and move the piece around for a very long time after it lands. T-spin must be called out, whatever that is. Pieces actually can't be called pieces, and in the game must be called tetriminos, and they must also be referred to only by their letter name, J-O-T-I, etc. There is a specific pivot point of the tetrimino. You get it. There's a lot of rules which didn't used to be there in the old versions. A lot end up overly limiting the game in my opinion, but I do appreciate this one. The game must use a specific type of tetrimino randomizer. You get one set of the 7 unique tetriminos at a time, and that set is jumbled up randomly. When that set is exhausted, you move on to the next randomized set of the 7. So, in modern Tetris, it is not possible to get the same piece or tetrimino 3 times in a row, and you'll go at most 12 pieces before getting that valuable line piece, or I tetrimino, if you will. So, Electronic Arts licensed Tetris for use on the PSP and PS3 back in 2009. Why was it delisted? Unfortunately, as any lawyers out there will know, contract agreements typically have a termination clause, reasons that an agreement is ended. In this case, it was the set expiration date of 2014. Drawback of digital distribution. I was burned the same way when I bought a PS3 sometime in 2017. I really wanted the Electronic Arts Tetris, but it had long been delisted. As there was no physical version, I had no way to get it. Similarly, I was bummed out that Sega's digital-only Outrun Online Arcade and Afterburner Climax were removed, with no physical version available. Some of you might be wondering, aren't these Sega games? Why would they need to remove their own games? In the case of Outrun, officially licensed Ferrari cars. In the case of Afterburner, a number of Northrop Grumman and Boeing vehicles, liveries, and logos. It's such a ridiculous reason. I honestly didn't know Afterburner had official licenses in it. So that was a major disappointment. But let's move on to a major disappointment of the 90s. I still feel the sting and resentment over this one. Has anyone ever heard of the game Fear? P-H-E-A-R? It was hyped in EGM and other magazines of 1995 as a cool 3D puzzle game for the Jaguar by H2O. It was almost complete when apparently Nintendo saw it at a trade show and paid a bunch of money to H2O to hire them as developers, and Fear was never seen again. With Nintendo, H2O would develop N64's The New Tetris, complete with its infamous hidden rant, in 1997 before releasing Tetrisphere on the N64, and not the Jaguar, a few months later. Now apparently Tetrisphere is way different from Fear, and I've heard it overcomplicates the game a bit. Out of bitterness, I've never played it. Well, it's actually because I never owned an N64. Epilogue. A year after that, the best version of Tetris would be released in Japanese arcades, Tetris the Grandmaster 2. Now, there are other good Tetris games, Giant Tetris, Puyo Puyo Tetris, Tetris Plus, Link's Tetris, well, not Tetris, Tetris 99 and Tetris Effect, but nothing beats Grandmaster 2 in my opinion. So anyway, I like Tetris, Weltris, Hatris, Bombliss, Faces, Ain't is not Tetris, remember that one? Tetris Attack? Well, that's not even Tetris.
Wow, you do know your Tetris. So, in the theme park episode, the reason I was talking about digital downloads in general, and Tetris in particular, and I probably didn't explain this very well, is because Theme Park used to be available to download on PSN, but now it isn't. That's an EA title, and another EA title that's no longer available, Tetris. But I totally get your point, and I did some looking into this. after getting your audio submission, and I found an article on delistedgames.com about the great Tetris delisting of 2014. So, EA held the license on multiple platforms from 2009 through the end of 2013, and Nintendo had a license for Tetris on the Game Boy devices from at least 1993 to 2013. But Ubisoft bought the license for all consoles and handhelds, leaving Electronic Arts with mobile platforms. And this change in ownership may have caused a lot of the online downloads to be removed. I say may have because the article says that it's unsubstantiated that Ubisoft now owns exclusive rights to downloadable versions. But odds are, yeah, that resulted in the removal of the PSP game's availability. I guess that makes sense, at least within the confines of digital distribution. This made the news recently where Apple, which owns the rights to Charlie Brown holiday specials, made these exclusive to their Apple TV Plus platform, so they wouldn't air on broadcast TV. And that led me to check Amazon, where I had bought It's the Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown as a digital download a couple years ago, and it's no longer available for sale. So it's a similar story, I suppose, with Tetris. But that doesn't make it suck any less, because is Ubisoft going to make a version of Tetris available for the PSP or PlayStation 3? Heck no. So what do they have to lose by letting those platforms remain available? They don't really have anything to gain either, I suppose, other than the nebulous metric of customer goodwill. Oh well. It doesn't explain what happened to the other EA titles, which used to be on PSN, like Theme Park. I checked out several other Electronic Arts games which were available as digital downloads from PSN, and other than a couple of Medal of Honor PS1 classics, I didn't see any which were still present on PSN and listed Electronic Arts as the publisher. I haven't really looked into why that might be, though. You are the only person to point this out, not because I'm any less wrong, but I'd guess it's because of the show's limited audience. Thank you, Bobby, for your audio submission. Keep them coming. My citizen subjects, we have reached the end of my occupation of your implanted chip device. I promise I won't tax you too heavily, but we'll see whether or not you've rebelled when we reach the next episode, which will cover Rayman. This will be followed by an episode covering the Jaguar CD and Virtual Light Machine, then Blue Lightning, and after that, Battle Morph. It'll be like 4 episodes in a row covering CD games looking forward. If you have any memories, opinions, or corrections about past episodes or the show in general, please send that in, text or audio file, to the email address jaguar@gamebygamepodcast.com. All show information, including episode progress, can be found on the web at jaguar.gamebygamepodcast.com. Thanks as always to Arithius for another solid assist on European game reviews. Coming up after the music, we have a quick podcast update as well as a little story time, the latter being tangentially related to something I mentioned during the episode proper. I won't persuade you to stick around if you don't want to, though. But either way, as my command airship floats over to the next territory, please remember that there is a lot of good to be found out there in this world of ours, even with widely ridiculed video game consoles. So do try to keep an open mind and a joyful heart. Thank you for listening. Just a quick state of the podcast update here. The Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast is now available on Spotify, Amazon Music, and Ghana, the latter being for those of you listening from India, which is wishful thinking on my part, I admit. But I had held off on adding my podcast to these platforms, especially Spotify, mostly because of my Christmas episode, 4 Tales of Atari Christmas Past, in which I had included unlicensed music which fell outside of fair use. There's like an entire Trans-Siberian Orchestra song in there. That's always bothered me, and it runs afoul of Spotify's podcaster agreement. So what I did, leading up to Christmas 2020, is republish that old episode, but replacing all the music with Christmassy music published under a compatible Creative Commons license. As I started on those changes, I realized I couldn't just swap out the tunes because I'd made references to them specifically. In the end, I just re-recorded the entire episode, which isn't a big deal because it wasn't very long. The stories are about the same. I might have elaborated on some aspects the second time around, and I included some other, more recent stuff as well. But with the now copyright-compatible episode in the can, I went ahead and added the show to Spotify and the other services. I've been wanting to do this for an entire year, so it feels good to finally have that done.
And now, story time with Shinto.
I had mentioned, a couple hours ago at least, a quote from Game Players magazine which Atari used to promote Syndicate. The quote included ellipses to replace words which, in full context, would have given that quote a different connotation. It bothers me when quotes are taken out of context, largely because I've been guilty of that myself. Quotes about Atari, no less. I used to have a subscription to Omni magazine, late 1989 to early 91. It was the January 1991 issue, which includes the following line. This is my abbreviated version of the line, using an ellipsis to change the context. Game players who have fried their eyes on the sizzling graphics of the ... Atari aren't interested in the less colorful visuals of the NES. I would trumpet that line around school. This would have been my freshman year at high school, proving to my friends that Atari was better than Nintendo. See, Omni magazine says so. You can't argue with an actual published magazine. Here's the full quote, no ellipsis. Game players who have fried their eyes on the sizzling graphics of the Amiga or Atari aren't interested in the less colorful visuals of the NES. Ho-ho, we're not talking about the Lynx or 7800 or any other console. We're talking about computers, comparing these computers to the NES. The article itself is about how different cultures play different games. In particular, this paragraph was about European gamers. The preceding sentence reads, since the Europeans are very sensitive to the quality of sound and graphics, not that many people want to buy Nintendo-looking games. That being a quote from Chris Roberts of Origin Systems, the designer and producer behind Wing Commander. But I didn't want my friends to know that the magazine was talking about computers, so I used the ellipsis to obscure that, and therefore changed the context of the quote. I feel that once you've owned up to doing something wrong, you're more sensitive to other people committing the same infraction, and for that reason I have a very low tolerance for people taking things out of context. You see that a lot, of course, in politics, and I lose respect for anybody guilty of ignoring context to further their own personal or political gain, no matter which part of the political spectrum they're on. There was an HBO miniseries I enjoyed very much when it aired, and later got on DVD, called From the Earth to the Moon. There was an episode about Apollo 15 where the mission had a greater emphasis about geology, and therefore pulled in Lee Silver, a geologist from Caltech, to do some field training with Irwin and Scott, the astronauts who'd be working on the lunar surface. They'd go out to Arizona and New Mexico, and Silver would help teach these astronauts what to look for and how to look for it. A big part of his training, at least in the fictionalized dialogue of the HBO miniseries, was focusing on context. You have a thing, but what's going on around that thing has just as much importance as the thing itself. Hey, one other tidbit about this issue of Omni magazine. This is the first time I'd ever heard of the infamous Atari landfill. Here's the quote on page 84. Legend has it that millions of Atari cartridges unwanted by retailers or the public were buried in a desert landfill somewhere in the American West. My brother and I wanted to go out with shovels looking for this legendary cache of Atari carts, but it was hard to know where to start. I guess we needed some more context. The edit I dropped in earlier about recreating my old PCs using the PCM software, there was one machine I felt I had to recreate that I didn't own, and one which predated my 386, and that's one of the machines in the high school computer lab. Not the word processing lab with the monochrome amber monitors, but the programming lab next door, which had several Tandy 1000 computers with dual 5¼ floppy drives. I recreated one of these in PCM as well, and added in a 20 megabyte hard drive. I don't remember how big they actually were, but 20 is a good guess. I learned MS-DOS on these computers, DOS 3.2, and learned to program in Borland Turbo Pascal. I still have all my old assignments from high school, along with some other programs and a couple of games, so I loaded all that up. One of the programs was a screensaver, a fireworks show, and running it on a 286 or 386 or faster, you'd be forgiven for thinking the fireworks explosions were in random locations around the screen. But On the 8088 of the Tandy 1000, I was sitting in class one day, bored, and the screensaver was running on one of the computers. It ran slow enough that I was able to determine that it's not random, but follows a fixed pattern of 50 locations around the screen. I don't know, I felt a sense of accomplishment figuring that out. Something that ran really well on these Tandys was Space War, a DOS version of the original PDP-1 video game developed at MIT in the early 60s. This game was really cool though, a whole lot better than the Atari 2600 game with which I was more familiar. My computer teacher hated this game. Not the game itself, probably, but the fact that it kept popping up on these computers every year. You got in big trouble if you were caught loading up Space War, I'll tell you that. A different game was, I'm going to say, reviled by other teachers in the vicinity, and that was a game called Tank Wars. This was a turn-based multiplayer game where you control a tank, adjust the angle and velocity, and try to shoot other tanks on the screen. We had, I believe, one or two Tandy 1000 TX computers outfitted with a VGA video card, which was the only way to run Tank Wars at the time. It also had this little dial in the front of the machine where you could adjust the volume of the internal speaker. When a tank was destroyed, when it lost all 100 men, it would explode in one of several random ways, often causing damage to other nearby tanks as it went. By far the most destructive death was a series of 4 increasingly massive explosions. Oftentimes it wouldn't do all 4, it would stop with 1 or 2, maybe 3, but if it went all the way, it was big, affected a lot of tanks on the screen. With 4 or 5 of us gathered around this computer, we would make some noise. Allow me to perform a dramatic reenactment. Oh, it killed me! Even the little volume knob on the computer cranked up to maximum was no match for the noise we made, and teachers from down the hall would come in to complain. We did get in some trouble for that, but hey, at least we weren't running Space War. Good times. On my emulated 386, I installed Tank Wars, which runs notably faster than it did on the Tandy, as well as games like Wolfenstein 3D and Doom. Wolf 3D was kind of choppy unless you shrink the window down a bit, but Doom, ouch. Let's just say that some things really aren't worth revisiting. Nostalgia can only go so far. Decompression routines were reverse engineered. Probably spam. It's always spam. Aren't you gonna ask me about my car warranty? Anyway. The PC... Sorry. I'm apologizing to the microphone that I just bonked. Player One magazine, May 1995. The summary reads, light years from its 16-bit conversion, this Jaguar version retrieves the interest of the PC original. It's all one line. Good job, me. You are an ambitious executive in the Syndicate, and you are an ambitious agent. It's going in the blooper reel, isn't it? Alright, let's push whatever button combination it is on the keypad that switches to digital and online reviews. There we go.